Development Committee meeting for the 12th of March. We have quite a long agenda. I have apologies, a full absence from the Deputy Mayor. She's on council training, I understand. Councillor Maxine and Councillor Muku, lateness from Councillor Emma, and partial attendance from Her Worship the Mayor. I'll move. Sorry, yes, Councillor Jeff.
She's online.
Oh gosh, yeah. Right, so sorry. I thought she was as well, but she's online. Okay, all right. And sorry, Councillor Jeff, you need to...
This isn't strictly an apology, but I will need to switch to Zoom from about, I don't know, probably 11ish, 11:30 or something like that.
All right.
If that's all right. Thank you.
Okay.
And I may have a period on Zoom as well when I go over to daycare and back.
No problem. Excellent. All right, so I think we've got the apologies. I've moved. Mayor Paula has seconded. All those in favour say aye. Confirmation of the agenda. I'll move. Seconded by Councillor Mark. All those in favour say aye. Those against?
Carried unanimously.
Excellent. Declaration of interest. I don't see any declarations. Wonderful. Moving along. Public forum. I have nobody in for public forum that I'm aware of. Excellent. We're making good progress. Item 5, confirmation of the Economic Development Committee open minutes for the 14th of November. Councillor Mark Donovan will move, seconded by Councillor Malena. Thank you. Any comments? No? All those in favour say aye. Those against?
Carried unanimously.
Excellent. So, item 7, the Chair's report. It's pretty self-explanatory. A lot of the subject is being covered in today's meeting. I'll move, seconded by Councillor Mark. Any questions? No questions? Any debate? Councillor Mark.
Chair, I just wanted to make comment and express a sincere appreciation of the leadership in this space that you're showing. It's your unwavering commitment, as I penned my little note last night, to accountability within this organisation is what I find very admirable. So I just wanted to publicly state that on record. So thank you and keep up the good work.
Councillor Mark, thank you. Mayor Paula.
Oh, sorry, apologies. Didn't have my card. Just want to also thank you for the work that you've been doing in the Municipal Endowment Fund space, and that helped us realise our goal of getting a development in the central city. I know I said to you, show me the hotel so many times. It became a bit of a cry. And we know that is an excellent development for the community. I think the wider public seem to think we're paying for it, but we're not. We've actually attracted external investment of a huge scale. And the good news is I know that we need more rooms that won't fulfil the entire quota of rooms that we need. So there is room for the other irons in the fire, which we have got going. And I know you're working really hard to bring yet another offer to Hamilton City Council. And I think that will really be the turning point for Hamilton's enrichment of the CBD, but also support that really strong events base and business events base that we have. So I want to thank you for that. Hamilton's not going to slow down in growth. It's only going to go onwards. So all of those things set up for a really good future for Hamilton. So thank you for your work in that.
Thank you. Councillor Cash.
Thank you. I just wanted to really echo what the other speakers have talked of, but also thank you for highlighting the medical school opportunity and what that will bring to our city. Speaking from a health professional background, the community is crying out for GPs, not only in Hamilton and our rural areas, but the country. And you know, the medical school in Hamilton, the economic benefits will be massive. So I trust your leadership in this space in terms of working with the university to help them achieve their goal. Thank you.
I'll quickly use my right of reply if I could simply say that I guess over the last 20 years in and out of local body politics, this has been the most rewarding term I've had. I feel that we've been really blessed with a great number of councillors, and we have an amazing staff, and some of the achievements that we've landed just recently are not a reflection necessarily of the work we've just done recently. They in fact reflect decades of hard work by a number of elected members and staff. I can't help but make mention of, and there are a lot of them, but Nicholas Wells in the strategic property area. This is a gentleman who has dedicated himself to this council over a number of years, and his strategic property advice has been world class. And so we're really, really lucky to have that calibre within our organisation. Mayor Paula, your leadership making it really clear that this was an expectation. We all knew that. I know Councillor Ryan, before going to Wellington, had focused on the hotel, and so it was just my luck and timing that I came along as we were beginning to really see that materialise. So the success needs to be shared by everybody in this chamber and the staff included in that. And finally, I've got to acknowledge Mike Bennett, who does just an amazing job for us in the economic development area. So his help is always greatly appreciated, and of course led by Blair. So with that said, I'll move the Chair's report. It's been seconded. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Those against?
The motion is carried unanimously.
Excellent. Wonderful. So we're now on to external agencies, and we are lucky enough to have Senior Director Margaret Devlin from the airport and Scott Kendall, and I see Ben there as well, and Nicholas. But should we do the airport first? So can we find another chair? That'd be great. Come on up, please. Margaret, I'm in your hands.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. Let's get ourselves organised and get the technology working. Right. What am I? Yeah, I'm ready to go. Thank you. Thank you, Chair, and thanks for the invitation to attend today's Economic Development Committee. If I may just take a couple of moments, thank you to all the councillors who attended the shareholder session last week, the bus tour. I know the staff got a lot out of that session, so thank you for your time. I know how busy you all are at the moment with LTP processes, etc. And in discussion with the team at the airport, we have agreed that we'll certainly be planning for at least one such tour during every electoral cycle. I do think it's actually useful that you understand the asset that you have and what's going on in that asset. And a lot does change in 3 years. And indeed, if I reflect on my 10 years, and I think I mentioned to some of you that I am the longest serving director on the board, much has changed in terms of creating a very strong regional asset with a real sustainable funding stream and a solid balance sheet that ensures that we are well positioned for the future, and probably more important for this committee, that we've mitigated the risks to the shareholders. Now, I'm conscious that we will have a conversation about dividends, so we'll come on and talk to that in a moment, but I do think it's important to acknowledge also that the risk now to shareholders has been fairly well mitigated. Apologies from Barry Harris, who has a diary conflict, and Mark Morgan, who is currently, I think, just about to go under the surgeon's knife for some knee surgery. So apologies, he's not with us today. So with me, as you've already alluded to, we have Scott, who's our Group GM Finance and Commerce, and Ben, who's our GM of Airport Operations. We do have a very brief presentation, but with your agreement, Chair Wilson, I'd like to rattle through that fairly quickly, just pick out a few highlights, because a lot of it actually covers off some of the things we talked about and covered off last week. But I really do want to actually get on to the questions. So with your agreement, we'll rattle through that, because I think we've got about 15 minutes. Yep. So Scott, your time starts now, please.
The agenda, because we'll skip some items, and really this is a quick recap of, I guess, the past, present and future of the airport. So starting in 2008 was quite a milestone, because it's the first time and only time since purchase that shareholders were called on to inject funds into the business. Through to 2013, unfortunately, loss-making did continue. Around 2013, quite a significant change in board, including Margaret's appointment, and then change in direction of the business as well. So the ship had to be righted a little bit, and it was really through to 2018 that the airport was able to return, the aeronautical business was able to return its first profit in over a decade. That's also about the same time we embarked on our current 10-year strategy, focusing on diversification and optimisation of the non-aeronautical interests of property around the business, while continuing to grow the aeronautical business. Obviously, we've talked about some of those successes. So we find ourselves today continuing on a journey of growth for the aeronautical business and the non-aeronautical business, ready to future-proof us. We've got to the point of removing liability on shareholders. There was an uncalled capital obligation of would have been another 12 million on Hamilton City Council. That was extinguished a few years ago. So confidence now that you're not being called on to put funds in to keep the airport afloat. And as it shows sort of a pathway as that 10-year strategy comes to fruition, we hope to be able to bring increasing dividends back to you, which I know is, given the current challenges I think that everyone's facing, is understand why it's a topic of interest. If we just quickly to the next slide as well, and it kind of summarises our statement of intent, but yeah, we are here to connect the mighty Waikato to New Zealand, and to be financially self-sustaining, and we are an airport first and foremost. I know a lot of recent times we have talked about property, but really here to assure you we are an airport first and foremost. We just quickly flip that, thanks to the next slide. So really this is the year in review, so really think of it as the 2023 calendar year. Started with the terminal opening and obviously the event we had there, and the airport's rebrand, see reflecting the community and the importance of Kingitanga in the local region with our dual branding. See, there was a lot of work done refreshing our aeronautical master plan, what a future-proof airport looks like and what aviation looks like in the future. We've also done work on the Private Plan Change 20, which of course is administered by Waipa, being we are in Waipa District Council's territory. That's to open up that northern precinct, that a future 100 hectares of industrial land to serve the region. We'll talk more about that in a second. A lot of work around infrastructure. Of course, we're the first airport in New Zealand to have its own solar farm. So we have the solar farm, we own the infrastructure, and we have the power that's powering the terminal. That's gone really well. So Ben will talk about that shortly, and broader sustainability initiatives we have. Of course, made the key strategic acquisitions around the former International Flight Academy. Having control of that, of course, allows us to control the narrative around marketing that as a flight school and hopefully attracting one back to the region, and some other significant engineering facilities that is, of course, allowed to see the likes of jet aircraft return to Hamilton for maintenance. Those are, again, key strategic acquisitions, and I think it's a good mesh of the non-aeronautical, the property arm of the business, and meshing with the aeronautical business for ultimately clear aeronautical benefit. And what that brings, we don't know yet, but really excited about having that enhanced capability of heavy aircraft maintenance back at the airport again. And then just some key risks, obviously, much like yourselves, some general, sorry, we might just go back to the previous slide. Feeling the sense of the general economic cycle we're in, what that means for discretionary travel and tourism, we're starting to see probably not the growth we thought would be there, and that's understandable in the current climate, though pleased to see airfares are coming down, and we maintain a really competitive airfare to Wellington and Christchurch, the cities we serve, and actually in many instances remain cheaper than Auckland Airport. So that's a real positive for us, that we should continue to see what people retained in the Waikato rather than being attracted to Auckland on price. So on average, the average fare out of Hamilton to our key direct ports is cheaper than what you'll find out of Auckland. That's something I think as a region, it's a really positive takeaway. And that's extended to a hotel, just the general economic impact and discretionary tourism. Hotel has actually performed really well this time of year. Of course, lots of events in the region, in the city and the region, so that's gone really well. Had a really strong past couple of months after a quieter sort of end to last year. And of course, weather-related events, although I'm not going to touch wood or tempt fate, but that we're cognizant, obviously, what weather events has done to aviation in the North Island last year. I'll pass you on to Ben, just a quick recap on the airport business.
Thanks, Scott. Kia ora koutou, and pleasure being with you today. Thanks for the opportunity. Just briefly on our passenger numbers, looking at the next slide, fairly stable at the moment. We're not seeing significant growth, and that really reflects challenges Air New Zealand in particular having with their Pratt & Whitney engines on the A320 fleet. That constrains, if you like, some of the ATR services as well, and that's had a flow-on effect to the regional network. So we're not seeing significant growth at the moment, but it is stable, and we expect that to continue for a couple of years with some constraints around the schedule and network in that respect. Just on to the next. Just touching on some of those sustainability themes that Scott mentioned. Obviously, we're very proud of the solar farm, but that fits in a context of a wider sort of spectrum of sustainability. We have partnered with the Airports Council International on their Airport Carbon Accreditation Program. We achieved level 4 this year, which we're very proud of, and that includes a verified 20% reduction in our carbon footprint. There's various initiatives that are continuing through the airport, and we're really seeing now the next big phase for us is going to be engaging with the airlines, and in particular around their technology needs and infrastructure needs. So we're expecting to see a shift, and we're already seeing that shift into electrification of aircraft, into hydrogen or other sort of powered aircraft. And the airport has an important piece of work to position and support that and ensure that we have infrastructure around that. And you'll know that we are working with Air New Zealand. We were shortlisted as part of their Next Gen commercial demonstrator to be one of the first airports to provide that electric service and to test that technology and sort of lead the way in that space. So that's going to be a big project for us, going forward if we're successful in that next phase. And finally, just touching on our master, just the next slide there if you don't mind, the master plan map that was signed off at the beginning of last year, and I think that was an important piece of work that gives us a footprint for the next 20 to 30 years, though really just part one, and I think there's some important sort of appendix to that. This slide sort of mentions some of the infrastructure works around the airport, but as well there's some important aeronautical themes, in particular the GA strategy that we've embarked on and was mentioned last week is a piece of work to really quantify and understand the importance of the general aviation precinct at the airport. So that's all the other bits and pieces of non-airline aeronautical activity, and in particular some of the challenges that they face around rising property values and getting representation in sort of wider circles. It's a very challenging economic environment with a lot of pressure, cost pressure around infrastructure and fuel and resources and things. So we're looking at, through that strategy, at a lens of how we can support that development and grow that. And the other piece of work is really just around our international connectivity, and we've done a lot of work recently on our border agencies and at how we will invest, if you like, in setting up that ahead of time prior to getting a customer, because we're aware that there's quite a long lead time in those agencies being able to offer services. So that work's already underway, and we're doing, if you like, some work around the northern end of the terminal that would be situated. So there's some important streams and themes in there that the airport's been embarked on, and certainly it soaks up a lot of my time. So thank you.
So that, Chair Wilson, is the presentation abridged and really open for questions now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Right. Colleagues, there is a motion moved by Councillor Jeff and seconded by the Mayor Paula. I wonder if we could throw that up on the screen. I think we just put up the original.
And then I can scroll down.
Yeah. what I thought I might do in terms of process, just get the motion up, and then I'll open it up for questions. Now, I know also staff have also come up with something they would like to add, but just I'll give you a few minutes to read it. Basically, it's saying we received the report, receives the statement of intent for the Waikato Regional Airport Limited. Actually, the mover of the motion, sorry, Councillor Jeff, would you like to explain the motion?
Oh, you're on the right track there, Ewan. It basically requests that the airport company go back and have another look at the statement of intent and strengthen it in two particular areas for us. And one is around the payment of dividends, and the other is the international services capability. And the basis of that is we feel that's a bit underdone in your statement of intent from our point of view, given what we were hoping for in our letter of expectation, what we were setting out, what our needs.
Now, I also am aware that Blair has asked for potentially additional things to be added. I don't know if the mover or the Deputy Mayor is aware of that just yet. Blair, do you want to speak on that point? Oh, I'm sorry. Mayor Paula, I'm sorry. Blair, do you want to explain what you were trying to do?
I thought Mayor Paula was talking. Look at the addition, which is really just the words, Amy, it's really the start of C, is just to acknowledge that our feedback is critically important on the statement of intent, but we are one of 5 shareholders, and so it would be helpful for the process for the Chief Executive and Sean Murray to go and talk with the other shareholders to say this is our feedback based on our meeting. We would like you to support this so the board, when they receive the feedback, doesn't get feedback from one shareholder but also recognising the other shareholders may or may not have a view on this. So we are only a 50% shareholder, so it's just recognising the unique shareholding structure in terms of giving feedback. So it's not to change the intent, it's just really just to define the process that happens, which will help ultimately the board to receive the feedback from Hamilton City Council.
So, Councillor Jeff, you might just want to contemplate that for a moment. We don't need to make a decision on that just yet. I thought I would open the floor for questions of either the airport company or staff.
Can I just ask a question to Blair on that thing while we're at it, if that's all right?
Absolutely.
So Blair, are you saying explicitly then the purpose of that is to convey that message to the other shareholding councils, but it's not going to change our message, right? You're simply passing on our requirements so they're aware of it, is that correct?
It's 2 parts. It would be to do exactly that, but ultimately our feedback will still be provided to the airport company, but it would be helpful if the other shareholders were aware of our feedback and in fact, and indeed potentially would provide some views, possibly in support or otherwise, when they provide their feedback in the statement of intent. Otherwise, the shareholding board receives views from a 50% shareholder, but what's the views of the other shareholders? And it just helps the process. Sean Murray is possibly online, so he may wish to add to that, but I think it's trying to be helpful here in terms of how the board can then take this feedback. Doesn't diminish our feedback in any way.
Thank you.
All right. Now, on that point, I have quite a few questions for Sean Murray, but I'm wondering if we, I know Margaret's time and her team will be valuable, so I wonder if we focus initially our questions, if there are questions on the airport company, and then we could talk briefly to Sean Murray. Anyway, colleagues, Councillor Councillor Bidder.
Thank you, Chair Ewan. So I'll start with the opportunities for international airline travel. Is it the border control that is issue for sort of like limiting our opportunities to go forward with that?
There's no one factor. So what we were made aware, because we had been proactive in the space, that standing up the border agencies had approximately 2-year lead time, and so we realised that that was potentially a constraint to airlines that tend to make decisions faster than that. So have embarked on a process to really start the planning around how we achieve that and hopefully reduce that lead time. But the reality is that there are a number of other factors, mainly sitting with the airlines to ensure that they have a business case that stacks up based on demand and those sort of factors. So that's the driver.
So the 2-year time frame is primarily driven by central government departments?
Yeah, it is challenging, particularly for aviation security, AVSEC, for MPI, so biosecurity, and customs are the 3 key agencies. The new Civil Aviation Act prescribes a new spatial planning element that coordinates those agencies more effectively with airports, and so there's a pathway there for us to work together more effectively to streamline this process. But nevertheless, the actual infrastructure in terms of equipment, the footprint on the airport, the recruitment and training of staff, the whole element and how that integrates together is a significant process. So that it really, I think it's a tangible, if you like, lead time on that.
Right. Is there any opportunity for your shareholders, being 5 councils with good political connections in Wellington, to hurry the process along?
So what I can say is no need. We're already actively engaged with the GM of AVSEC, who's working closely with us. We've already allocated a project manager to assist us with this from the agency's point of view. The other agencies have been engaged and are on the journey with us. So really we're underway. So I think really the key catalyst for this being successful now is an airline partner to bring the passengers.
If I may, I would say thank you for the offer, and that if necessary we would look, if we hit any obstacles, to come back to our shareholding councils as well. And just on the other airlines and international airlines, these matters are obviously very confidential, but I can say that they are progressing. So we're just moving those things together at the same time. So please be assured we're not ignoring the opportunities for international. It's just, and Chair Wilson, you will know better than anyone how at times you've got to keep all these things moving at the same pace. So things are happening, and we will keep shareholders updated as and when we are able to through that confidentiality piece.
Excellent. Now I've got some questions about a different topic. Electric plane infrastructure. You're working with Air New Zealand and others. I do have a serious concern about electric planes, and that you simply don't have the energy density and batteries to make them viable. How much money would the airport company be putting in compared to Air New Zealand, etc., putting in money for that?
The current proposal that went for the trial project was Air New Zealand will operate the aircraft, and I understand you have constraints around technology in that, but part of this exercise is to actually, it's almost a feasibility to understand what the constraints are, whether it's the technology itself or the infrastructure that charges the technology. From our perspective, there is a small amount of infrastructure. So we've got a rather large transformer at the airport that has had some upgrades with the solar farm. The solar farm, of course, is there. But we're not having to upgrade the network to get power to the airport. On airport, a very small amount of infrastructure needed to support the next demonstrator trial that Air New Zealand are talking about. But it's actually technology we would invest in as well. If we see, for example, I use the analogy of airside vehicles like fire trucks and things, which under a combustion engine model actually aren't that efficient. They tend to run short times. In a good airport, you don't tend to want to use your fire trucks too often either. So they tend to, they sit and they get a short amount of use as necessary. So I think, our infrastructure that we're upgrading is future-proof, that we will need ourselves. Ultimately, the charger itself comes with the aircraft, and that's Air New Zealand. So really, in terms of a capital investment, very small, and it's bringing forward investment we intend to make anyway.
Right. Yeah. That is a relief.
Yeah.
Finally, I want to dig into the dividend policy, because that's obviously a big issue. on one of your slides, which you had, the WRAL direction slide, where you had various years, it looked like you had 2033 as increasing dividends. Are you intending to increase dividends before 2033, or is that the end date for having increased them?
Very good question, and very astute to pick that out. So we have the approved dividend policy, and that policy looks at every year, as set out in the statement of intent, what the board would consider in terms of dividends, and those decisions are taken primarily on how much free cash the business has got, as opposed to the accounting profits. Ultimately, the old expression, revenue's vanity. What is it? Revenue's vanity, profit is sanity, but cash is reality. And it's actually what we've got available to pay out in dividends. I know there's a view that, well, perhaps you should borrow to pay dividends. And the world of corporate affairs is littered with organisations who have borrowed to pay dividends and then haven't been able to have a sustainable cash flow going forward. So first and foremost, the board will consider every year what is available to pay out in dividend, and that will be looking at what are our commitments going forward, so that we are able to pay our debts as they fall due, and also then, as we're entering into this growth phase, and particularly around Northern Precinct, what will that mean for us in respect of having available cash to pay out dividends? So the board is certainly not saying there's no dividend between now and 2023, and it's equally not saying that all increases stop at 2023. These are just kind of milestones for us as we work our way through, and particularly the impact on the business of Northern Precinct and what that will do to the organisation in terms of value uplift and value creation. But I do want to please be assured the board looks every year at payment of dividends, and it's a question of what is available to pay out in dividends.
That is good. I love that revenue is vanity, profit is sanity, cash is reality. However, I do want to ask a question. In your understanding of dividends and your dividend policy, do you take into account the needs of the shareholders, in particular the benefit of any payment to the shareholders being that we can borrow 280% of any income. So that is a huge benefit to us compared to, say, the 6 or 7% you might be paying on borrowing. So, yeah, do you take that into consideration?
And a very good question, and I come back to the comments made by Blair around we have 5 shareholders that need to be involved in this conversation. But, again, I come back to it's important to keep that dialogue going around what are the expectations and then how can they be met or achieved. Going back to that slide that you referred to, and Scott has also alluded to, 10 years ago, the company was actually in serious financial difficulty. The current structure of the organisation has certainly removed all liabilities for shareholders. So in terms of risks, those risks are completely mitigated. So it really is, and I would urge and encourage the conversation around what is the expectation. And look, I think we're all very conscious, and we're just about to have a presentation by HWT, of the very challenging economic situation that we're all in. And to be honest, coming out of COVID, I don't know whether we all thought we were going to just go back to the way it was, but it's been a very challenging situation, and it's important that we all work together to ensure that what we're doing is for the ultimate benefit of the region.
Thank you.
Andrew asked some of my questions about the dividends, so that kind of, I guess, just to follow up one on that, I guess it depends also on the levels of investment you want to do or get approved by the shareholders to do, isn't it? So the less...
It's very much, that's what I mentioned, when we look at what free cash we have, it will be out over looking at what are the infrastructure requirements in particular, and there'll be infrastructure requirements for the airport as well as property, what they are, and then what is actually available for us to pay out in dividend.
So if this council wants to make some difference outside of the free cash for dividends, the available cash, I mean, it would have to look at the levels of investment and talk to the airport company about that, how fast you do some of that commercial investment. That would be the only other lever.
Correct.
Right?
And absolutely correct. And I think it's important that in terms of infrastructure, and I guess I'll put on a number of other hats that I wear, but I think the country is suffering widely from deferment of capital expenditure that has been just pushed back. So I would urge that those conversations can certainly take place, but it will be important that the consequence and risks are understood around deferment of capital as opposed to any cutting of capital.
Thank you. In terms of the motion, it's not up there now, but you saw it before. Do you have any, I am talking with the other mayors, sort of trying to get their view, because we don't see there. I mean, that seems to be a little bit of a flaw. I don't know how we see their feedback. So you collate it all, but we don't necessarily see their feedback unless we find a way to do that better. Through you, Mr. Chair, we might need to, can we find a way to do that better? But anyway, in terms of the amendment, the motion, that you don't have any serious reservations with that.
No, and in fact, I think you've hit upon a very salient point, Mayor Paula, that it would be great, purely selfishly from the airport's perspective, if we had one letter of expectation as opposed to potentially 5. So if that is something that could also perhaps come out as an action or following in from these meetings, that one letter of expectation would be great. And I would certainly welcome the further engagement with the shareholders.
That's a really good point. And I wonder what action we need to take next, because I did try and ring round last night, but of course, you can't expect people to pick up. So, yeah, okay, thank you. But nothing that gives you great alarm signals in here. Okay, cool, thank you.
Councillor Sarah.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Margaret, for coming in today. I was keen to understand a little bit more around the work we're doing with Air New Zealand and enabling electric planes. What do you perceive to the barriers to that? Is there anything that council could, shareholders could be doing in order to support that work as well?
As far as regulatory barriers in that, not at this stage. So the aircraft, there's been an aircraft built overseas. I don't think we've got to the point of the New Zealand regulator accepting that yet. I think that might be a natural junction to involve you, but in terms of regulatory hurdles, none that we know of yet. Okay. Obviously, it is a new space. And certainly, as I mentioned, with infrastructure, no barriers there either. But I appreciate, again, like the international services, I think we keep engaged on that. Where we need to lean on you for a favour, we'll certainly do that.
Okay, thank you. And in terms of the expected investment, I mean, when we visited the airport, there was discussion, for example, around a turning area, which would, I think, better enable movements on the runway. What are the other kind of top things that you're looking to invest in terms of capital? And how do you see that impacting on the financial sustainability of the airport in future years and the ability to turn a better profit? Yeah.
So a key infrastructure is, we've got a lot of what we call landside infrastructure, so roading connectivity, state highway network, our Three Waters network as well. So some of that infrastructure is original from when the airport was constructed as it is in the 1960s. It's now end of life. Some of it's needed to accommodate growth. And that's not including what's needed under its own business case to fund the Titanium Park and bring Titanium Park's Northern Precinct to life, putting that to one side. So there's around 20 million of, if you like, landside infrastructure that needs to be done by the end of the decade. Aeronautically, a major runway project, sort of a once about every 15 or 20 year project due at the end of the decade as well. That's resealing the runway. Right. That total sort of investment we need, including, I guess, maintaining the infrastructure we've got and necessary upgrades, is around 50 million over the next sort of 7 or 8 years. That's into our 10-year modelling, and I understand that in the past where we've reported high land sales and things, and I know it was sort of a precursor and a catalyst to some of the dividend conversations. But equally, we look back in results and we've had some really good ones and we've done really well through COVID, but equally we do have some challenges ahead. So we're cognizant around making sure we're in a position to fund those ourselves without calling on yourselves for more investment.
Okay, thank you. And in terms of the Northern Precinct, what impact do you see that having on the value of the shares that councils hold over, say, the next 10 to 15 years?
Yes, the modelling around that is we do see significant uplift on that. So obviously the region is the regional story around growth. Obviously the past couple of years growth in the current economic climate, but moving forward, I mean as it stands today, if we were to put that property on the market, worth about 60 or 70 million. If we develop that out with some investment, potentially 200 million of investment, we see that being roughly in the order of $500 million fully developed out. So obviously a significant uplift that flows through to shareholders there.
Okay. Okay, thank you. And I guess looking forward then, firstly, when would you expect that development to be complete, developed out? And second part of that is, looking forward beyond that, what do you see the role of the property arm of the airport being?
Okay. If I may, I might just comment on that and then Scott can come in with some of the greater detail. At this stage, we're still looking at what we do around how do we work on developing Northern Precinct. So does the Titanium Park take that completely itself? Do we involve another partner? Do we split it and have half done by some partners and half done by ourselves? And that will actually have an impact as well in terms of if we dispose of property today as our land, as Scott has said, there is a value, but if we develop it further. So there's actually quite a lot of moving parts in this. We probably can't give you a definitive date other than saying that there are lots of things going on and the board is still contemplating what would that funding model look like and would we have potential partners. Clearly with Titanium Park, when it was first set up, there was a different structure in place with external partners. Fair to say that that had a moderate to less than moderate success rate in terms of working. So we just need to learn from those lessons as well and take that forward. So still a lot of moving parts at this stage.
Okay, so just to, I guess my understanding from that is then you're still doing work on how you would fund the actual infrastructure for Titanium Park, but are you confident that you'll be able to work out a funding mechanism to get progress?
Absolutely. And I think if you look at where the airport is and look at where Hamilton and Waipa are in terms of roading and the location, there is no doubt that there will be a lot of interest. It's just a question of making sure that we get the right partners who want to work with us, as opposed to someone who is maybe looking at not necessarily being aligned with the objectives of the wider airport group as well.
Okay, thank you. And yeah, the other part was then, has there been thinking about then, I mean, it is a long-term thing, but then beyond that, where do you go when you've developed the land you hold? Like, is that kind of the end point, or do you keep?
I guess when we started off looking at, when we reviewed and renewed the strategy, and one of Scott's slides talked about, we've got 5 or 6 component parts. One is that the airport, and excuse my very basic phraseology here, but the airport needs to wash its face. So the airport should be cash neutral. And then we look at the other aspects, so the hotel, the property. Some property we have sold, others is on lease, and we're also looking at build and lease as well. So it's actually looking at how we use that whole diversification strategy to allow us to continue doing the various component parts of what the airport group is doing.
Okay. All right, thank you. Thanks, Margaret.
Councillor Jeff.
Yeah, thanks, Chair Ewan. Hi. Thanks for coming along, Margaret and team. Just a couple of questions going to the issue of dividends, which is obviously a hot one today. On page 23, just looking at your accounts there, about halfway down on the left, there's a line which talks about purchases of property, plant, etc. And in 2022, you spent around about 10.5 million on purchase of property, plant, etc. Can you give us an idea what you actually spent that on?
Terminal seismic work.
Okay.
So it was a 15 million project that spanned about 4 financial years, but I think in that year it was probably about 8 million on its own. Also, that would have been the year we were coming into MIQ, so there was hotel refurbishment in there.
Okay, all right, okay. And in 2023, you spent around 2.8 million on the same thing?
So that was the completion of the northern end of the terminal, so the former international end. There was about $1 million there. There's also been, in round numbers, another $1 million on that would have been the start of the solar farm, so about 1.1 million in that as well. So
Okay.
key sort of projects rather than a lot of smaller ones.
All right, all right. And why did you choose to use your profits to do this instead of borrowing for it?
Well, ultimately, we have actually borrowed, so I think debt's increased pretty well relative to the investment we've made over that time. It's not year for year the same, but I think we've probably, we would have added about 10 million of debt over the past 3 years.
Okay, but here you used your retained profits to do this, yeah?
Yeah, we have used some of that, still primarily debt funded, yeah.
Could you give a percentage, Scott?
Without doing a calculation off the top of my head, no, probably not. I could report back with one if you want.
Would it be 50% or?
It would be, I'd say, more debt than profit, maybe 60-40, yeah.
Okay.
But we can come back with that if you'd like that information.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. I guess where I'm going to is this, I'm asking myself, what's stopping you? You've got a big asset base. What's stopping you from borrowing for some of these purchases so you can ensure your loyal shareholders get a decent dividend?
I think the answer has been provided that we're not completely cash funding the investment. We can come back and give you the exact number. So it's not absolutely one or the other. And I would revert back to the conversation that I'm more than happy to have that wider conversation around dividend expectations. But just to be clear, we're not funding everything from cash. The investments are through borrowings, and you can see how the debt has increased.
Thank you. All right. Page 18, the Chief Executive's report. There is a really encouraging paragraph there. The last 6 months has seen the first credible engagement with international airlines, etc. Airport has been responding to genuine inquiries regarding the possibility of scheduled Trans-Tasman services. What are we actually telling the people who are making these inquiries? Are we giving them, what time frame are we able to say we could, if someone says today, right, we want to start a Trans-Tasman service from Brisbane or something, what would we say to them? How quickly can we do it?
Look, we are responsive to really their needs, and ultimately we'll work to their timelines. And obviously, standing up an airline service is not insignificant in work, and even a well-established airline will still need to go through a significant sort of process and timeline to achieve that. So, look, I think the work that we've embarked on, particularly with the border agency constraint as we see it at our end, is the most important step in ensuring that we can be responsive to those inquiries when they come.
Okay, so you've got an airline today saying, right, we're ready to go. How quickly can we set it up? How quickly can we start?
Well, that's a really interesting question. I mean, we in our best case scenario, I think we could probably achieve 12 months. The border agencies would like 2 years, so there's probably something in the middle there that we would need to work through, and hopefully we can achieve whatever timeline that we're presented.
So border agencies would like 2 years.
Ideally, yeah.
So why are we in that position? If we're an airport that is proactively seeking international air opportunities, as our letter of expectation talks about with the east of Australia and Pacific Islands, why are we in a position where, when we actually get an offer, we're saying it's going to take us 2 years?
Look, sorry, Mike. I'll just say that it's not an exact science, and so the border agencies have signalled that that's their desire from us. But ultimately, we work with them and figure out what that timeline is going to look like as we go through the process. And we there hasn't been a direct inquiry that's required us to go through that process until recently. And so, you know, we're informed now, if you like, through those negotiations with the agencies, what their expectations are and what their requirements are, and we'll just keep working through that process with them.
Yeah, thank you, Scott. But could we not have actually done some of that work beforehand instead of being reactive? Could we not have actually prepared ourselves?
I think, Councillor Taylor, that's a really good question, and it is the question of where do you put the investment, which I guess is maybe where you're going to, that maybe more should have gone into that. But the reality is it's the airlines who need the surety around things like passenger numbers, and at the moment we are very much an outward bound, so people wanting to travel out of Hamilton to somewhere else. There isn't the same response of people wanting to travel into Hamilton from overseas, and that's a piece of work that the airlines themselves also look at. It's how do they fill the plane both ways. So again, I keep using the terminology, there's a lot of moving parts. So what Ben and the team have done is certainly working with AVSEC and the various authorities to get us ready for that, and engaging with airlines when they're interested. And you know, we actually do engage with them to talk to them. But the reality is it is predicated on a business case that says it is viable for them to actually provide those services. And that's viable without any form of contribution. So it has to be able to, again, to use my expression, wash its face. So again, ultimately, long term, I think there will be many more international carriers coming to Hamilton. But at this stage, we are working with one and very close to being able to land that, excuse the pun, land that outcome.
And they're okay with waiting for a couple of years?
We're in discussions with them around the timeline. My understanding is it may not necessarily be a couple of years, but we're certainly looking at, again, what would work with their schedules as well. So I'm trying desperately not to tell things that are confidential at this stage, but perhaps when we're closer to finalising some details, that will be a confidential briefing to Chair Wilson.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Councillor Anna.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation and for the last week as well. It was very good. Just a question around the long-term viability, I guess, of the business in terms of what you mentioned, Ben, in climate impacts. So I'm just interested in how you assess those risks and how you are future-proofing the infrastructure to account for those risks also.
Yeah, look, we've got some climate goals, and that includes, I guess, alignment with the Paris climate agenda, and we've adopted the SDGs that sort of sit around that. And without going into the science of it, I mean, we've sort of mapped a pathway to achieve those goals. And so I think that, as I alluded to before, the big challenge for us is going to be the sort of Scope 3 emissions and working with the airlines and how we can position ourselves to meaningfully make a change to what they're doing, particularly around electrification or other alternate energies, is going to be the big win. And so for us, a significant portion of that is outside of our control, but certainly we've positioned ourselves already to be as responsive to that as possible. So I think we're in a good place.
That's great. I suppose I was more meaning in terms of the extreme weather events into the future too, like how you're going to deal with intense rainfall going forward. Yeah.
I think you must have been reading our board pack from last week where the team did present to us on that very subject. There you go.
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly it. Obviously, I think, and heightened sensitivity to what the events of Auckland last year. But, Waikato, for many reasons, business choose to come to the Waikato in terms of earthquake and where we are relative to sea level and we're inland. So those are a really strong in our favour. In terms of redundancy, our energy capacity, obviously having on-site generation, so we've got solar, we've also got diesel generators. We're probably only using about a third of the capacity that can be delivered to the airport at the moment, so redundancy in that sense for future growth, but also rainfalls and stormwater capacity. So a 1 in 100 year event would only consume about 70% of our stormwater capacity. So quite a significant headroom there. Obviously, as you talk about intensities and things, that can be difficult to model, but I think in terms of that high-level comfort, really, really pleased with where we're at.
Okay, great. That's awesome.
If you mind, I'll just add to that, that we expect to be the net beneficiary, if you like, of some of these climate changes. And, you know, we've seen obviously a significant impact in Auckland and other parts of the North Island, and Hamilton is lucky to be in a relatively benign sort of environment relative to some of those other places. So we certainly are conscious of that and looking to position ourselves to support those other parts of the country, you know, when those events do happen.
And just another question in relation to competing with Auckland, and I did ask Scott this at the visit. There has been consideration around merging with Auckland Airport, but is that also, is it an ongoing conversation, or is it?
I'm not sure there's been any discussions about merging with Auckland Airport, because that's a shareholder matter. But certainly conversations. In fact, we had the airport down last week to talk to us just about how we could work more closely together and what opportunities there are to do that.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Anna. Mayor Paula.
Just one, thank you, just one super short question in terms of the international flights again and readiness. Some of us were on the trip, I think most of us were, but can you explain the ability to get security up, because that's another part of readiness, isn't it, for this international flights? You've got to have security, customs, etc., whatever. And can you just, in a brief terms, explain what we are doing to get ready, but also what some of the barriers that you talked about on that trip were? Thank you.
Yeah, look, the work involves a significant amount of planning in the first instance, particularly the sort of material footprints of utilising space in the northern end of the terminal. The security screening equipment uses a large area, and there's some key constraints around where that can be situated to ensure that there's an effective passenger flow. AVSEC are very conscious of the delays that are well publicised and are keen to avoid those in the future with some really smart technology and smart solutions. And so they're looking at Hamilton with really almost in a greenfield sense to introduce some new technologies and new systems that might improve some of that long-term sustainable flow of traffic through the terminal. So I think there's two aspects. One's really the material sort of footprint, and that needs to be worked through in some detail. And then there's sort of the operational aspect and how that gets utilised. And obviously there's a large number of, it's quite labour intensive, the actual security on, you know, at the terminal. And so how we streamline that, or how we ultimately recruit and sort of train and work with them to make sure that they can deliver on that is also a key part of it.
So that involves government's input into seeing Hamilton as an international destination of some sort, and they've got to lean into that.
Ultimately, the decision sits with the Ministry of Transport, so they make, if you like, have the final say around implementation of that. So there'll come a time when we have been through, if you like, the planning phase and hopefully have a customer, and we can, you know, we'll need to go and make sure that we're ready to sort of put some money in front of us, and that might be when we lean on yourself.
So okay, just to clarify that then, because you're saying once we have a credible business case come to us, that's when we wouldn't do any pre-work on. I thought you were doing some discussions with the Ministry of Transport and others to kind of understand what it means and how quickly it could be stood up. And because weren't you also talking at that thing at the trip around resilience for New Zealand Airport? Should there be another Christchurch earthquake, or let's touch wood, never. But, you know, if that kind of thing, and then we had to have some rerouting to Hamilton, having the ability to do that, was that part of the discussion?
Yeah, all I'd say is that there's a wider conversation already underway, but, you know, there comes a point when you need a business case signed off, and so I think there's kind of separate conversations at this point in time.
But, sorry, to answer your question, Mayor Paula, the work is in train to actually provide those services. So those two things are working in tandem around what we need to do with central government and then what that business case is and how they knit together. Yeah.
I've A couple of questions myself, but we've been around a couple of times. Kesh, I'll go after you.
Most of the questions have been asked, so thank you for being here and your in-depth answers. Just help me understand, in terms of strategic priorities set by the board for the airport, we've heard of your diversification strategy, and then you've got the actual aviation arm. So how does that fit in terms of priorities? I understand the need to be cash neutral, but what is the direction given to airport management? Is it focus on Titanium Park, or is it push for the flights and our aviation arm? How does that fit in?
Very simply, it's both. The team have to deliver. It's not one or the other. It's actually, this is what we want to deliver, and these are all the levers that have to be pulled or pushed depending on where you are. So it's not, we're not investing in the infrastructure at the expense of the airport or vice versa. So it's actually a combined effort. I'm sure the team would agree with that, the board's not asking anyone to do one with the exception of the other.
Both have equal weighting.
Absolutely, yeah.
Perfect, thank you. And just coming back to a question that was posed earlier around where council can support your efforts, I understand the engagement with the GMs and the different groups, but at a political level, I think that was what the question was. Is it, in terms of meetings with ministers and political, the political wing, do you think the council has a larger role to play in that arena, or are you comfortable just progressing as you are?
Look, I think where we are at the moment is absolutely happy to engage and always really wanting to engage with our shareholders as well. And as and when that's needed, I think we'll actually take up that very kind offer, absolutely.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Kesh. Ben, I guess a first couple of questions for yourself, if I could. Margaret articulated clearly that attracting an international airline is complex, that often you've got to wait for the airline to do a lot of its analysis, and credible airlines don't knock on your door until they've done that. I think we all agree with that. And we now know, because the GM Mark Morgan has told us, that you've had a credible airline walk through the door. So that must have been exciting. Okay. You've answered a lot of questions, but my question is, in light of the fact that, as Margaret has highlighted, an airline would not have approached you if it hadn't calculated not only market demand in both directions, not only would have it turned its mind to its own availability of aircraft scheduling. When did they specify what time frame they could commence international services?
I think the...
When did they want to start?
So I don't think we can answer that directly without reaching sort of our commercial confidence. But
Right, I respect that. So are you saying that the barrier to them having started was the lack of border agencies?
I think that is a key constraint, and
Thank you.
We've identified.
Could you remind me, we've had international, how many years of international flights did we have?
18 years.
Yeah.
Excellent. And a lot of that did operate out of the northern part of the terminal?
Yep.
Okay. And so I understand what you're saying is that the airport now is focusing on how they would revamp that to embrace new technology.
Absolutely.
Okay. All right, thank you. Scott, could I just quickly, turning to the interim report, could you point to me anywhere in the financials if the airport has invested either last financial year or the current financial year in any strategic property investments?
Yep, there definitely will have been. It'll be buried in that, as part of that $10.5 million that we talked about in 2022. So it's purchase of property, plant and equipment. So the strategic aeronautical assets will be embedded in that number.
So on reflection, when you first answered that question, you made it sound like it was all in earthquake strengthening. Would you like to reflect on that and give us a fuller explanation?
Yep. So,
Including, since you're head of finance, what was the amount of that quantum you invested in strategic property purchases?
it's just over $2 million.
Thank you.
Yep, with the market value very much higher.
Margaret, you made a comment early on about the legacy of a number of companies that have gone out and borrowed money to pay dividends. Are you aware of a number of companies that choose to balance very carefully, leveraging off their balance sheets to make purchases on borrowing, thus enabling still to service their shareholders and the desire for dividend?
Yeah, I think, Chair Wilson, there's many variations of that. My point was really around the long-term sustainability of borrowing to pay dividends. Doesn't actually end very well for any entity.
But you'll accept that the airport has made decisions to spend $2 million on strategic property investments that could have otherwise been put aside for dividends.
Again, I'll pass over to Scott around those details, but ultimately it is the decision around what will actually give us the longer term benefit in terms of our diversification strategy. But I hear Scott in my ear about...
Yeah, and what I guess the strategic acquisition is, so out of that $2 million there was the former flight school building, which obviously is strategic in the sense of actually not really a great commercial return for the airport, but for the region, and 300 foreign students, 100 local jobs, economic benefit as a multiple of the number of students, so potentially 100 million I think was the number for CTC, and the former New Zealand engineering facility, and what that's obviously enabled with actually having some maintenance facilities which help strengthen our international prospects, as we've talked about as well. So I think in terms of strategic, not necessarily a commercial return, but actually for the good of the region.
Scott, I'm sure you'll recall, in the histories that we obviously as a council recognise that. That's why Hamilton City Council, I think, provided a line of credit to enable...
To CTC, yep.
Exactly. And
Yep.
Can you remind me what line of credit we gave?
I think it was actually direct to CTC, but I gather it was in the order of $1 or $2 million.
I think it was slightly higher than that. But okay, so we certainly understand the strategic reasoning. Could you just explain to me currently what your debt to equity ratio is in terms of your borrowing, leveraging your balance sheet?
Yep. So we've obviously, we've got just over 20 million of debt. That number's increased since the interim results, just with CapEx. So round numbers, it's about 10% of our asset base, maybe a little less.
Right.
I would make the point that some of those assets, given their nature, can't be levered against. We have a significant amount of land holdings, obviously Northern Precinct. At the moment, in time, yes, it'll be able to be levered as part of a wider commercial opportunity, but and land holdings for future aeronautical development. We obviously, those of you on the bus tour see a significant amount of land we can develop. Obviously, we can develop it. It doesn't have an income stream. It's hard to borrow against at the moment.
We're envious, Scott, I guess, as we sit here with a 280% debt to equity to have someone with only 10%. But is it fair to say, Margaret, that there is an opportunity to leverage the balance sheet?
Sure. We've got a 280, well, we're looking at for next year, debt to revenue ratio, not equity. So we're talking about two different things.
Yeah. Thanks, Sarah.
Look, I think all these things, and as we look going forward, as I alluded to earlier, around what we want to do and what needs to be done with Northern Precinct, all of that comes into the mix.
Okay, thank you. Just quickly, if I could, in terms of the letter of intent, could I just have an expansion? So clearly we gave you our letter of expectation. Is it fair to say that some of the other shareholders held a different view? Because what we got back was slightly different to what our letter of intent was.
To the best of my knowledge, I'm just looking to Scott, I don't think we received anything else from any of the other shareholders, but I just need to check that with Scott.
I think we did receive one other.
Right, that was it. So I think that comes back, Chair Wilson, to the issue of it would be good to have a joint letter, or at least a letter that's being discussed with all parties.
All right. But help me, if as a 50% shareholder we set out very clearly what our expectation was, and I think you've just told me only one other shareholder. It does beg the question why the letter of intent doesn't more meaningfully reflect our letter of expectation. And that's why we're having to ask for the board to look at that.
When you say letter of intent, you mean the statement of intent, the
Yes.
draft?
Yeah.
So I guess, and again, my understanding is the process is the draft comes on the back of the letter of expectation, and again, to receive feedback from that letter or that draft statement of expectation. No, let me get that right. Statement of intent.
Yeah.
So certainly welcome the opportunity and welcome the feedback you have provided.
Right. But just for final clarification, it would be helpful to the airport board if there was I think what you've told me, a more united view from all shareholders, removing any doubt as to the expectation from the board.
Again, 5 shareholders, and as Blair alluded to, with no shareholder being the majority, it does create some challenges, and I think it would just be really helpful, particularly for the board and management, to actually have a coordinated, cohesive view from all the shareholders around their expectations from their asset.
Thank you. I wonder if I could ask a question of Sean Murray. Sean, are you still on?
Yes, I am.
Great. Sean, currently, are you the liaison person between all 5 shareholders and the airport board?
Yes, I am. And with regards if I just follow on from the conversation just now, the letter of expectation, the letter that we issued as HCC, we copied that into all of the other shareholders so that they knew exactly what we had sent through. And we didn't have any feedback from that in either direction. So there was nothing negative that came back or any concerning issue from the other shareholders to our suggestions to the board.
Excellent. But you were aware of the one submission from another shareholder to the board?
No, I wasn't aware of that. They hadn't obviously thought to send that through to me to be aware of. So no, that's the first I've heard. But I certainly like the idea of one single letter of expectation being jointly prepared by all shareholders and agreed. We had tried that some years ago. However, we received a lot of pushback on one of the elements that we were particularly interested at the time, which stopped that from happening.
So, further question, how are you, I see Blair, I was about to call you Councillor Blair, has suggested the Chief Executive, that we delegate that authority for the Chief Executive. My first question is, why haven't either yourself or the Chief Executive implemented a strategy where we tried to get a united voice?
Well, we have in the past, as I say, and on one occasion we did get quite a strong pushback, but I think it's something we should pursue again. To be clear, we do actually tend to have a united voice when we meet at the various presentations from the airport company. So, but we will pursue that again.
Okay. Thank you. That's all the questions I have. Sorry, just Councillor Sarah raised an interesting point regarding the northern precinct of the airport. Now with the plan change having gone through, have you had that revalued?
Not yet. Plan change hasn't gone through, so it's obviously being mediated and we're confident there's a solution there, but no, it hasn't gone through. And it will be revalued at the end of the plan change, as at 30 June.
And that, when it is revalued, is it your understanding that would reflect its potential value uplift over the period of the project?
No, based on as is now, so obviously there is a value uplift, so it'll look at what the end value is and work back investment required volatility in the
Right.
market to a value now.
Okay, and I think I heard you say that potentially over a 10-year period, that could be worth $500 million?
Once developed out, and it could be a 10-year period, it could be a 20-year period. If you look at purely industrial demand and demand for industrial land in the region, you're looking at about a 15 to 20-year timeline.
Excellent. And just remind me again the quantum that the airport would have to invest to enable that $500 million uplift, and how you intend to service the borrowing.
So the total, I guess the total value is $500 million, as Margaret mentioned. There could be multiple ways to cut that, whether there's partners or we go slow on our own. It'll be a standalone development with its own borrowings. So it's not compromising the airport's, if you like, the airport's existing balance sheet and ability to fund aeronautical infrastructure as it comes due.
All right. So how, as a CCO, are you going to manage that? Is that a major transaction that you're suggesting you're going to decouple the Northern Precinct from the other airport activity to create a separate balance sheet?
Well, it's already been in the process of being decoupled out of the airport into Titanium Park. That was obviously a major transaction. It would have been the previous council that signed that off at the end of 2021. Obviously conscious that as we go through the steps and what partnership investment looks like and large borrowings, that will be likely to hit major transaction hurdles.
Right, so that will have to come back to us.
Correct. Yep.
Because that is a significant.
Yeah.
Okay. My final question in terms of major transaction, there's nothing else that you've obviously got planned in the next 12 months?
Nothing.
Other than you've highlighted?
Just the only one at this stage is Northern Precinct.
Okay,
Yep.
great, thank you. All right, so colleagues, we've got the motion moved by Councillor Jeff and seconded by Mayor Paula. And if we put that back up, are the mover and the seconder happy with the addition that we delegate the Chief Executive to work with other shareholder councils to request Waikato Regional Airport Limited amend the statement of intent to strengthen the following matters? Blair, that's a little loose. Are you happy to try to tighten that up with a time frame of when the Chief Executive would come back to this committee with an update from the other shareholders? So that's the first question. And Mayor Paula, I'm just wondering if you feel that it shouldn't just be the Chief Executives, but maybe the mayors are involved.
I was going to suggest that. I think that's fine, because I've already started. I think that would be helpful. I've already started conversations with the mayors.
Yeah.
I haven't included South Waikato yet, but I will. Right. I've already started some conversation with them to see, because I do think pulling in the same direction is helpful.
Can I just, for clarity, obviously the mayors simply reflect the will of the councils. Can we assume that, well, obviously you would reflect our will because we've issued a letter of expectation, and I'm astonished to hear that the other shareholders having significant investment in this asset, with the exception of one who chose not to share it either with Sean Murray or ourselves, but the other three have remained silent. I'm just trying to work out how we would confirm that the mayors are reflecting the expectation of the elected members. Ours is easy because we have a more transparent process. Mayor Paula, have you got a suggestion of how we could...
Well, I think you have to trust me on that one to have the right conversations with the mayors, and they are, excuse me, ultimately responsible for how they work with their councils, so I would encourage them to get a view. But of course my relationship is mayor to mayor in that respect, and I'll come back to you guys, which I think is enough for now. I mean, it's a clear steer that we want to have this conversation, isn't it, Chair?
Oh, absolutely. I'm just, I am absolutely comfortable that our process is transparent. You know, and you will represent our letter of expectation. I was just questioning to make sure that your fellow mayors, because they haven't got a resolution of their own councils.
Well, I have no control of what the my colleague mayors want to do with their councils, but I can at least have the conversation and make sure that you know, at our level, mayor to mayor. We've had that conversation, and I, have to trust that they have their processes in place to work with their councils.
Cool.
If they don't, well, that's...
Excellent. All right, thank you. So, yeah.
I think D is a really valuable, I'm pleased to see that added, because I was concerned about visibility in terms of the outcome. And
Excellent.
I think that will provide that. Thank you.
All right, so you're happy to move it. Mayor Paula, you're still happy to
Yep.
second it? Yes,
Just
sorry.
noting-
Margaret.
Just noting I'm not in the country on the 9th of May, but I will be able to report back in another way.
Sure.
I just think that addition would be really helpful for the board to
Right.
get that clarity ahead of the SOI being finalised. And I think those dates are end of June, start of July for finalisation.
It
So
needs-
that would be really helpful. Thank
Yeah,
you.
by you'll need to finalise by 30th of June, so yeah, it's the best date.
Excellent. All right, well, excellent. So we've got the motion. It's been moved by Councillor Jeff, seconded by the Mayor Paula. No other questions on the motion?
So
Sure.
are we just moving this segment and then moving the remainder of the, we're also receiving other reports? are we?
Yeah, the one other report.
So we're still yet to hear
Right,
from other
all right.
external agencies.
Not debating civic, but we have yet to receive the reports from
All right.
Health and Life Tourism.
Understood. Right, okay, you're right, sorry. It's one of these scenarios where we probably, at least we've got the motion on the table, and I guess now we've got to let Tourism Waikato do their thing. So thank you very much, everybody from the airport, really appreciate, yes.
It would normally be excellent. Can I just ask that we move this part now, because you know that I have to step out for an appointment, and so I'll be leaving at about 11:15.
Yeah, look, actually, that we can do
Is
that.
that okay?
Yeah, so what we'll do is we'll separate off C and we'll make that.
I'm just going to remove the receiving report as well.
Okay. So just bear with us, colleagues.
That does it.
Yeah, that does it. And it's to Sarah's point as well. Excellent. All right. So thanks everybody from the airport. We'll now take care of this part. Jeff, I will go to you as mover.
Yeah, look, councillors, we own 50% of the airport, and as governors, we represent the interests of our residents. There's no bad blood meant by this today. It's just to ensure that the airport board is doing what we want it to do and what we've asked it to do. If we start with the dividend, we've got an asset worth a hell of a lot now out there. The council has been clear to the board and expecting a strong dividend. I'm not suggesting the airport borrows to pay dividends at all, but I am suggesting that given debt accounts for only 10% of its asset base, in future it makes double sure that it borrows for any strategic purposes instead of gouging what's left for dividends. I am questioning the urgency behind provision of decent dividends. And that's really what I want to take away out of today's motion. Secondly, I was concerned that the letter of intent does not reflect this council's desire for promoting international opportunities. We were explicit about it in our letter of expectation, but I had to really work quite hard to find it in their statement of intent. I felt it was underplayed, and I'd like to see more emphasis on it. And there are opportunities coming our way, that's the good news, but we had an admission today that an airline hasn't been able to start such flights as early as it could have because the border agencies weren't ready at our airport. And I suggest, given those delays, I'm questioning whether our airport's focus has been urgent enough in this area up to now. I'm a little worried that we have an airport board focused rightly in many ways on property development and doing well with it, but I want to see us maximising the opportunities available for our airport, national and international. That's actually what the airport's job is. So this motion doesn't aim for conflict or anything like that. It's simply saying let's ensure our council and our city's priorities are reflected better in the airport's letter of intent or statement of intent. Let's have another crack at it and get something from the board that I feel would better reflect, just give a bit more comfort for this council about where the airport's heading. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Jeff. Mayor Paula as seconder.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. I think there's a lot of good things that come out of this discussion. Definitely support the dividend policy around the direction you're travelling, and thank you for the dividend that you did produce, albeit very small, I'll just say, this year. And so we do understand that. And I just make the point that in terms of the shareholders, of which we are one, we are responsible for giving a steer back to the airport company in respect to how far or how fast they develop. I mean, they obviously are the technical experts and give us the best advice in terms of investment and what's required and how we get the best returns for our money. So we have to rely on some of their expertise. But if we want them to slow up or do less investment or to borrow more to do, that comes from the shareholders have to give that direction. I'm really pleased. I think this conversation has been useful from the point of view of I believe we need to do some fine-tuning with how the stakeholders, through their mayors and other representatives, work together to decide on some strategic priorities, the letter of expectation being one. So it seems to me that we should provide some time for those stakeholders to come together prior to the letter of expectation and kind of nut it out together and have a cohesive and common view in the asset that we all share a part of. Look, I do want to thank you, though, the airport company, for it's not all a negative commentary, because your report, the field trip that you gave us, your end-of-year report and various things have shown a really strong performance by the airport company. And part of the reasons that we decided to not pursue at this time a sell of any of our shareholding was because in a couple of years, with the work that the airport's doing now, we can expect to get greater return. And so, thank you for setting us up for that future success, because I think we have to balance, last sentence, short-term needs, and that includes the dividends, with the long-term success of the airport. Welcome international flights, always have. I know that there are some, it's not as easy as people are suggesting around the security needs of the airport. It's not something they can come in and do on a long weekend, put all the facilities in. It's quite complicated, but I'd like to see some progress in there anyway. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Cash.
Thank you. Yeah, look, I admire the ambitions of the airport. Listening to the history and the last 10 years and where it started to where it is now. I admire the ambition to be cash neutral and looking at the diversification of the airport itself and how to be more financially sustainable. With my questioning around the priorities of, the strategic priorities of the airport was, after reading the draft statement of intent, when you look at the core purposes, it talks about air services to the region, connecting the Waikato to New Zealand. It talks about diversification and, capital value and things like that. But it just didn't hit the mark for me in terms of the international travel. It's not mentioned at all. When I look at the key objectives on the next page, it's not mentioned at all. So that was a bit of a red flag. When I think of, I take a step back, I look at Hamilton itself in our region, to be named the fastest growing city in the country, or to have a new hotel being announced, or there's all of this economic activity happening. So I'm hoping that our airport, follows the same trend and that we actually look outside of New Zealand, because I truly believe the market is there. So fully support the motion. And yeah, looking forward to strengthening our airport together with the other councils. Thank you.
Colleagues, any other speakers? Oh, sorry, Councillor Anna Casey-Cox.
Yeah, just quickly, I want to acknowledge the airport company and your commitment to climate and reducing emissions, and to being the first airport in New Zealand to have a solar farm is really exciting, and also to have Air New Zealand suggest that they, may want to develop that work further with us in terms of electrification is really, really exciting. And I think it's something that our community can feel proud of in terms of what you're doing there. So, yeah, other things have been said, but that's just something I really wanted to highlight and thank you for. Yeah.
Thank you to the team from the airport for coming in this morning and taking your time to answer our questions. And also thank you for the work that you've been doing. I think we have the habit of having short memories. And I think we need to remember the airport used to call on councils for injections of cash, and over the last 10 years we've been told it has become self-sustainable. So it's easy to forget the past and focus on what we see as shortcomings, and actually we need to acknowledge that progress. In terms of, and I want to absolutely thank the board for their commitment around looking at long-term financial sustainability and ensuring the ability of the airport to have a diverse stream of income and to wash its own face. But I also want to acknowledge the work that we're doing around Titanium Park. One of the reasons why I do not support the sale of shares at this time is because we have a huge amount of work planned for the next 15 to 20 years that will lead to a significant value uplift. We heard that the land's worth 60 to 70 million, maybe 90 that we at the moment, and with $200 million of investment, we will likely see it worth around 500 million. So that's a significant value uplift over that time. I can't help but point out also when it comes to the shares, actually we need to think about long-term sustainability. This council has had a bad habit over the last few years of taking on debt in order to keep rates low. Now, I'm not making a direct analogy, but actually when you look at the impact that's had on our finances, it's not been pretty. So we should think twice before saying, hey, take on more debt for a short-term benefit. I'd also note the confounding of debt to revenue and debt to equity. And we need to be careful when we're talking about finances.
Right. Okay, I don't have any other. I'll just quickly, if I could. My first comment is a bouquet to the airport board for the area that they have excelled in, and which is the property development aspect. I've always said that it needs a balance, and so I believe you've executed that aspect particularly well. And to Councillor Sarah's points, I acknowledge that in the last 10 years you haven't had to call upon cash, which is great. But I also highlight that that's what shareholders do when they take a strategic investment. They take risk, and they were called upon and they have invested. And we now look 10 years later, our $7 million investment is worth at least $130 million. Of course, that would be our 50% share of both cost and revenue. I do feel that we've lost an opportunity with not being able to be as well prepared as we should have been for international flights. I was always under the impression that the focus was going to continue on the property development, but you were always going to be able to respond to international flights when there's an inquiry. I'm really pleased that the Mark has come out saying, yes, you've had a meaningful inquiry. And I think we've all heard that if we had been in a better position, because it wasn't an issue of needing to lengthen the runway, it wasn't an issue in terms of space within our terminal, it was an issue of border agencies. And that's about relationships, that's about leveraging central government to enable economic development. And we all know 18 years of international flying had a huge economic injection into this city. And we had always, and I had always assumed that we were going to be ready and able the minute a credible carrier had walked through the door. We know a credible carrier has walked through the door, And we've been told by Ben that they were ready to go, but they've been limited due to the lack of facilities. I'm winding up. I feel that we're clearly sending a message that it's important that the airport pays a dividend, and I welcome the fact that we're putting in place a mechanism for the chief executive and the mayors. Having said that, I'm also mindful that it was mayors and chief executives that created the structure, the shareholder relationship, the shareholder constitution, and this perverse mechanism where not one shareholder has a majority. And so I am mindful that the very organisations that created the problem are now going to be left with resolving it. I hope they do a better job in execution this time around than their colleagues did 20-odd years ago. Right. It's on the table. It's been moved by Jeff, seconded by Mayor Paula. All those in favour say aye. Those against?
The motion is carried unanimously.
Excellent. So let's get on to Tourism Waikato if we can, and then we'll look for a morning tea break. Yeah. So we've also got Calvin from CoLab, so we'll try to get those two done before we go for our morning tea. We're in your hands.
Chair Wilson, if I may, I have to leave at 11:30.
Okay.
I thought we might have been concluded before that.
I hope so.
So there might be a little bit of change of play with Scott coming in, but I'm here today. No, I'm not Barry, I'm now Mark Morgan to support Nicola.
Today you're actually Richard Leggett.
Okay, right. I can be everything to everybody. But my apologies, I don't like to leave meetings early,
No problem.
but
Fully understand. It's gone longer than we thought.
So, Atamaria, tēnā koutou katoa. Look, thank you for having us. And yes, apologies from our chair, Richard Leggett. He's almost back in the country from being a visitor in Cambodia, so nice to have him back on shore. And Margaret Devlin does join me today as our Director of RAL, as already been sitting here, as our shareholder. Before I kick into the report, which you've got from page 40 in your agenda, congratulations in echoing the sentiments earlier in the meeting. Congratulations on the hotel announcement. That is something we have been rooting for and seeing the need for so many years. It's amazing to get this far and this close. So we're excited for our, as you've mentioned, business events and event sector, but also our travel trade, who have all been taking business elsewhere because we have fantastic experiences and event venues, but no beds. So congratulations and thank you. The report you've got in your pack is for the first 6 months of the financial year, so just remember that that's July to December. So at the end, I'll touch a little bit on the more recent activities that we've been undergoing in this half of the year. We can click on through, thank you. So quick numbers and stats, death by numbers, but the key points here are 1.9 or 1.87, near enough $1.9 billion of visitor spend across the region. Now that equates to 5.1 million per day. So we're pretty proud of that number. It's a great investment into our sector and into our communities. Domestic still remains 80% of our visitor spend. So just putting that there. The purple box is the visitor numbers into our region. So that's the phone use, if you remember our stats and data discussions previously. So that's an average of 56,000 visitors per day in our region. So if we put that in population speak, it's like Invercargill or Nelson turning up on our doorstep every day. So that just helps to put it into perspective. Business events, now the data you have in your report is only Q3 because Q4 was not available. Q4 is now available and we've achieved and continue to achieve 11% market share of events and 10% market share of delegates. So still achieving really well there considering those other two new venues further down the country are now online. Commercial guest nights, you've got those numbers in your pack, so I won't go too much into those, nor the black box there of the international visitation, just in the timeliness of reporting. The other stat that I haven't put up there, but I would like to share, is that through our marketing and PR activity for that 6 months in your report, but I just want to pull it out and highlight it a little bit, 13 million people reached through our activity. That's 13 million people reached through our marketing and PR campaigns. We'll click through to the next, please. Thank you. These graphs are for Kirikiriroa Hamilton itself, not for the region. Apologies, there is an error in the paragraph in your report, but the graphs are correct. So visitor spend into Hamilton is just tipped over $1 billion there. So that's 10% greater than last year, 11% greater than pre-COVID years, which is probably more important. Domestic spend, 851 million and 2 million from international visitors. The new graph on the right, so that is new work, just shows where the majority of our visitor spend comes from into our city. So domestically, Waikato people visiting Waikato, a visitor spend is 40 kilometres from home. Auckland and Bay of Plenty, so our drive markets. And for the international, US, Australia and the UK are still our strong markets. China market is picking up, but this of course is data to December. Thank you. And the next screen is commercial bed nights. So for Hamilton, we often see Hamilton, Kirikiriroa, top of the pops for occupancy rate. That continues. So 70% occupancy rate is absolutely phenomenal, and that's probably partly because we haven't had the beds. Compared to a New Zealand occupancy of 55%. So really fantastic results. I think we'll leave it at that and go to the next slide. Thank you. This is new data that we've been digging into a little bit with employment into our industry, in our sector. It's been a little bit hard to dig that out in some places, but we now know that we have just over 12,000 employees working directly in the tourism visitor economy. So it's across tourism and events. And then of course we have our service sector that services the tourism sector, where the buses are serviced, food and retail, food, beverage and retail. So it's a great result there of 7% of our 7% more than this time last year. If we overlay that with averages of visitor spend, for every 151,000 that visitors spend in our region, that's a job. So every $150,000 is one job, direct job into the visitor sector. So it's been quite interesting using those numbers. Next slide, please. The next 6 months, we're already into month 3 of this next 6 months. Domestically, we have our summer campaign out there live now. So that runs through until Easter and the April school holidays, into our 2-hour drive market and our fly market. So that's to extend the summer season into the shoulder seasons. We don't typically market the heat of the summertime, but we do market the now time so that we can extend that visitation period. For our business event sector, we've just returned from Australia from the AIM event, selling to the incentive market. Great cut through there and some great follow-up already. Meetings, which is the great trade show for conference organisers, is in June. Trade and international, so selling to travel trade, selling to travel wholesalers. We have the Explore show coming up, which is the Central North Island group. Trends in May, IBO, IDEO, trips and sales into Australia with Tourism New Zealand. Capability building, symposium coming up, one-on-one visits with operators, so still very busy in that sector. And of course, for this 6 months, quite a bit of our focus has shifted to the long-term viability of the work that we do through the long-term plans that are pending across our 6 councils and our service level agreements. So you will see some activity from us in the next little while, some messaging and ensuring and aiming to ensure that we don't weaken or dilute some of our messaging and work going forward. Given our time here is limited, I'm looking at the little clock up there. Look, I'd really welcome some discussions one-on-one to help understand the tourism sector, the visitor sector and what we do for that sector and for our communities more so. I think I'll leave it there, Chair.
Thank you. Colleagues, questions? Councillor Bidder.
Thank you, Chair Ewan. Would you say Airbnb provides an important capacity for events and tourism?
It absolutely does, and there's no data to really capture. We used to capture that data, but that has been put behind a paywall now, and it has been an incredibly important part of our visitor sector. and also visiting friends and relatives for us here in our region. So what you'll see is spend compared to the bed nights is sometimes doesn't look like it's matching up, and that's because we do have a lot of day visits from Auckland, and we also have a lot of visiting friends and relatives.
Right.
And Airbnb, peer-to-peer.
Thank you. And given that we've got a shortage of beds, is the Airbnb capacity in direct competition, like taking beds away from the motels and hotels, or is it?
I think it's been
catering
filling a
capacity?
very needed gap at the moment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And final question, how big a problem, or would you say emergency housing in motels is a big problem for tourism?
Certainly has been. We've lost a lot of bed capacity, of course. The people have needed those homes, but we have certainly felt the impact of that in the visitor sector. Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions, colleagues? Oh, yes, Councillor Marr. Sorry.
Thanks, Chair. Question for you, Nicola. Just a couple of questions. Thank you for, firstly, thank you for the work you do. Just for clarity, how far in advance do you guys work in terms of on the horizon?
Of course. So at the moment we are bidding for events, business events into 2025 and 26. And our travel trade conversations are happening for the summer of 25, 26 and 26, 27. So there is a very long lead in time, thank you. So the work we do today is not for tomorrow, it's for tomorrow's tomorrow. So there is definitely a strong lead in time.
And would you say your confidence levels are reasonably?
Interest is very high in our region.
Yep.
When the RTO was redeveloped in 2011, the conversations at those meetings would have been, where are you? Where's this place? And as we've educated both our conference organisers and travel trade, it's now a conversation of, I know where you are, I know what your hero products are, what's new? And that's the messaging now, and the questions now are, what's new, what else have you got for me? So they know who we are, where we are, what our big products are, and what is new as the conversations now. So it's taken some time to build those conversations to that point, but we're there now. Thank you.
Cool, thank you. And just one more question, Chair. The Hamilton to Christchurch campaign, what learnings can you take from that? That was on page 47.
Yep, as a fly market, we're very keen on strengthening those inbound tickets into our region. Yep. Christchurch, and it's even more broader than Christchurch, it is the Canterbury, their drive region to their airport. Working together, there's a lot of power in working with the airport, both airports, and working together to strengthen that messaging. Yeah.
Okay. I think that's all I've got. Thank you.
Thank you.
Colleagues, now I have a question for clarity, if I could, from Councillor Louise. She's just asked, could you clarify if you said 13 million people reached through your marketing?
I
or
did.
was it 1.3 million?
No, 13 million.
Thank you.
13 million
Excellent.
reached through our marketing PR.
Yeah. Sometimes it's hard
activities.
to hear online, but Councillor Louise just wanted that
And I was
clarified.
probably going very fast too, sorry.
No problem. I've got no other speakers. Thank you very much, Nicola and Margaret. Excellent, that's it.
Thank you.
I'll quickly call up Calvin French, and we'll go through CoLab, and then I'll put receiving the reports for both at the end, colleagues. Calvin, sorry for taking so long. It's a lesson that when the airport comes first, you may be delayed.
Noted. That's absolutely fine. Thank you, Chair, and thank you everyone for the opportunity to talk to you this morning. Have we got some slides there? Yep. Flick over to the next one if you would. Thank you. Look, I obviously will take the annual report as read, but I did want to take the opportunity to highlight a few things about CoLab and some of the key messaging within that report. So the first thing is that CoLab is all about council collaboration, and our vision is that through that collaboration we can maximise the wellbeing of our communities. Our purpose, therefore, is to enable the councils to benefit from those shared opportunities. And we achieve our vision in 3 ways. The first is that we act as an ideas laboratory, so we work with councils to identify and develop opportunities to work together, and increasingly, and this is a message I'll come back to later, increasingly we're looking to identify smaller groups of really enthusiastic councils who want to get on with a particular idea and just press on, and in that way go faster. The second way we achieve our vision is by delivering shared services to our shareholding councils, and I will come back to that in the context of HCC shortly. And finally, we enter into joint procurement arrangements for the benefit of councils. Most notably in that regard is the professional services panel arrangements and collective insurance program that we have. Next slide, thanks. So last year, the CoLab team did quite a piece of work around trying to better articulate and also quantify what the benefits of collaboration were across the region. And so we have essentially a service library of benefits, and we hope to roll these out with any of the work that we do and use them as a communication vehicle for our shareholders. But fundamentally, our benefits of it, we've bucketed into 3 different areas. One is the reducing of costs, the second is creating value, and third is simply enabling innovation through those research and development opportunities, and also the working parties that we have. We've also done a piece of work that takes that regional benefit and tries and distills it down for each of the individual councils in terms of what councils are investing and what benefit we think that they are receiving for that investment, and also the value of the services that CoLab provides. We have sent those to councils in a draft form, and we're currently working through with some council staff just to validate those numbers. Next slide, thanks. I can't emphasise this enough. The relationship that CoLab has with Hamilton City is significant, and it's significant in a number of facets. So firstly, of our 9 current shared service offerings, Hamilton City is involved with 8 of those, and the only one it's not involved with is targeted at smaller councils, which I'll talk to briefly shortly. And beyond that, you benefit from a whole bunch of other forms of collaboration. I mentioned the working parties earlier, which are functional groups of functional staff, so health and safety or procurement and the like. And obviously you benefit from the investigation work that we do into new ideas. We're very grateful for Hamilton City's involvement in both the advisory groups and of course the board itself, where Lance sits on that on behalf of the Hamilton City Council. And the final significant interaction we have is that of course with CoLab Waters, our single largest service offering, the people that sit behind that are actually Hamilton City employees. And so we have a true partnering arrangement in delivering services to other councils in the region. Next slide, thanks. In the annual report itself, I just wanted to highlight a few key things there in terms of the activity that was undertaken. Firstly, we hosted a triennium induction for newly elected members. We stood up 2 new services. So the first of those was CoLab Procurement Support, which is a shared resource that's accessed by 3 councils who don't have a need for a procurement resource in their own right. And then the second service offering was CoLab Learning, which has 10 councils involved, and it's essentially the councils collaborating on learning outcomes in a particular area and then working with CoLab to develop learning content that meets those outcomes. We delivered our first LiDAR dataset capture, and that project is imminently nearing the end, thank goodness. and we've stepped up our engagement with council executive teams, and we will continue to do so. Next slide, thanks. So finally, I just wanted to touch on and make some comments about our performance and the measures in the annual report, because we haven't met our targets in some areas. The first thing I would note is that some of our projects didn't progress to a point where we could actually identify potential council savings and quantify those within the financial year, or alternatively they were of a nature that wasn't actually about cost savings per se, it was about creating value, if I refer back to the earlier buckets that I talked about. And examples of that are Right People, Right Place and work on the Three Waters that we've been involved with. The second thing I'd note is that some opportunities have been realised without a formal business case, so we haven't been able to measure against benefits in that respect. But that has encouraged us, as I alluded to earlier, to focus on being a bit more adaptable and adopting a different approach to just get on and do things with the councils that are willing to focus on a particular idea. We continue to have a challenge around the ability to go at the pace we would like to go at in terms of progressing projects, and that certainly comes through in the performance measures. There are a few reasons for that, but invariably, or most commonly I should say, it is the capacity of council staff to be able to be involved in those projects. Staff are busy at the best of times. If you layer long-term planning year on top of that, it becomes particularly challenging. And look, I would note that we failed on a 80% target, which is where the services that we deliver, 80% of our councils, we either meet or exceed their expectations. 79.8 was the actual number, and there was quite a debate with the auditors, but they decided they wanted to add value to that 0.2%, so I'll say no more. Look, just finally, I appreciate that you've not seen our draft statement of intent for the coming year, but I did want to finish by highlighting 3 key points which you will see in that document. The first is that for the first time the board and management have developed a longer-term strategic goal. So we've got 3-year strategic goals, and those are improving the way that the company communicates the value it provides to its shareholders, and I talked about that earlier, and in part, in addition to that, increasing that value. We're going to have a focus on growing shared services, and that may include providing services to councils outside of the shareholding group, but we'll never do that at the expense of the value that we provide to the shareholders themselves. And we want to employ great people so that the services we do provide are of a really high quality. And so we'll be focusing on 3 things: delivering the services that we do well, as I said earlier, working faster with smaller willing coalitions of councils, and thirdly, bringing new ideas to the table, looking at overseas practices and what's happened there and how we might be able to apply that to the Waikato. With those new goals, we're obviously introducing new measures, and you'll see those coming through in this statement of intent as well. And the third and final point I would raise in about the SOI is that you will see that we are returning or reducing member charges that councils pay to the company by about 900,000 collectively in the coming financial year, and that's just our small way in which we can help contribute to the financial challenges that we know that our shareholders are facing. And we think we can do that in a way that utilises cash on hand, but makes sure that the company is financially sustainable on an ongoing basis. I will leave it there. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Kelvin, that's very helpful. I've got Councillor Sarah and followed by Councillor Mark.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Calvin. We were both present yesterday at the Mayoral Forum and the Mayor Iwi Chair's Forum around waters. What work have you guys done in terms of any efficiencies that you think could realistically be achieved through CoLab around procurement and managing capital projects and spend, etc.?
So we've done quite a bit in that space, and we'll continue to look for those opportunities. I mentioned professional services panel, which is a joint arrangement. It's about to go out to market again. Look, there's a significant sum of money that goes through that arrangement with the councils that are involved, and the efficiencies in terms of time saved, not having to go about engaging with individual consultants on every procurement that you undertake, because you have a head contract that encapsulates all of that, is incredibly significant. Look, there's any number of opportunities from a procurement perspective, Councillor Sarah, I should say.
Okay. And I mean, also in terms of, sharing expertise across organisations and things. I mean, are there reasons that we are not doing that now? That if there are the opportunities there, is it just that we haven't? Are we because we're waiting to see what the preferred model would be for water delivery?
You're talking in a waters context,
yeah, in the waters
specifically?
context, yeah.
No, look, we're sitting behind the scenes, obviously, in terms of the work that's being done at the moment around a Waikato Waters entity under the national program. We haven't consciously turned our mind to shared resources in the context of that waters beyond the CoLab Waters services that we provide. But there's no reason why we couldn't do that. And you'll have seen, obviously, the option one there is an enhanced status quo model, and CoLab is set up already and is in a position to be able to capitalise on that should that be where the shareholding councils want to go.
Can I just comment from a board point of view? We actually told Kelvin and the team not to do that when we were going through the reforms under the previous government.
Right, yeah.
We didn't want to waste resource on something that was being driven in a statutory fashion, but now that the playing field's changed, that conversation's definitely happening, and there could well be some potential for CoLab to be more involved in the water space as we go forward and the options that we look at.
Okay, all right,
including
thank you.
procurement as well. Yeah.
Cool, thank you. Cheers.
Excellent. Councillor Mark.
Chair, Kelvin, mine's just might be, it's just a small, hopefully a small question, and touches on that 79.8% number you mentioned. What's that in terms of a physical number? Like, what is the actual?
So we had a 45% response rate. So we went out to council staff that are involved in receiving the services, essentially, and chief executives as well. So I think we got about 108 responses out of 250 or whatever it is. So there was one pocket in particular, which is to do with the building consenting group, where we fell well short of our what we wanted to achieve in that area.
Okay.
But it's something that we're aware of, and it's something that we'll continue to be working on with the councils. So.
Okay, right. Thank you.
Anna.
Yeah, thank you. Just a quick question around as mentioned in your report, around the digital interface, I think it is, with
customer digital enablement.
Yeah. So just any comment on why that kind of fell over, I guess, because it's an area that I'm sure we're looking for efficiencies in, but...
Yeah, look, it's... technology is a bit of the holy grail, I think, personally, from a shared services point of view, and we have tried in the past and not succeeded in getting collaborative work happening with IT systems behind the scenes, but the notion of one IT platform across the councils continues to raise its head in the discussions that I have, and I don't think it's going to go away in any time soon. I think one of the key barriers is that it's a bit of a longer play, right? So if you take a particular point in time, each council will have their own digital strategy. Each council will have invested heavily into existing IT systems. And so to walk away from both of those things isn't done easily, I guess. And so the play is how do we, in a longer time frame, move towards getting that alignment so that there isn't a huge cost to councils from walking away from something
So
they've
you're
sunk into.
not dropping it, you're just,
No,
it's
look,
going to be
it's bubbling away.
longer
I look at it, it is a slow burn, and I think that we probably need to get some external advice, because I'm certainly not a technical expert, which could shine a light on, for the councils on actually what that pathway looks like.
That would be great, yeah.
Yeah.
And I guess just, what was my other question? Oh, you mentioned capacity of council staff as being a barrier to some of this work going forward.
Yep.
You'll be aware that we've got some proposals around cutting some more staff capacity. So I just wonder, in terms of what you need to get your projects off the ground here, do you have any suggestions in terms of what kind of staff member here you need to be able to progress things?
To be honest, that will be very dependent on the nature of the opportunity that we are looking at. So I couldn't really say, it's the
Okay,
the
I was wondering if
person's
there's a
boxed into
CoLab
that.
project manager person or something like that.
We have got internal project management resource, albeit small, within CoLab, and actually one of our projects that we're looking at the moment, Project Ohu, is around creating a project management shared service offering, and Lance is actually sponsoring that for us. So we're looking in that regard to find 2 or 3 willing councils, and I think we're pretty much there now, that will create, design what that service might look like, and pilot that program in the first instance.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Anna. Now, colleagues, no other questions? Calvin, thank you.
Very welcome. Thank you.
That brings us, morning tea is within our grasp. Okay, but got to follow proper process. We do have Civic Financial Services. Now, Tracy is available to answer any questions. You will recall that we had a presentation last time. So are there any questions of Tracy on Civic? Excellent. No? So I will move that the Economic Development Committee receives the report. B, endorses a statement of intent from Civic Financial Services for the year 31 December 2024, seconded by Councillor Sarah. Are you happy with that? You were keen for morning tea, so I thought this is one area we could cooperate. Are you all right?
I'm not going to fight you over that one.
That's good. All right, so all those... Thank you. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Those against?
The motion's carried unanimously.
Now, help me, do we do a 15-minute morning tea?
Completely in your hands on that one.
Let's just do a toilet stop for everybody. 15 minutes, come back as quickly as you can, and then we'll plough on. I think I'm going to try to break for lunch at about 1 o'clock. How does that everybody feels? Okay, great. Thanks. Blair, we're in your hands.
Thank you, Chair. In the interest of time, I'm going to take my report as read and just invite any questions on it today.
Excellent. Colleagues, any questions of Blair and his report? It's a good report. Going once, going twice. Yes, Councillor Mark.
Is that, so we can ask questions around the attachment 1 to 14 November ED Committee Outcomes Dashboard? Is that?
You can ask any question of my report.
Okay. But it might be directed more at the contributors.
That's all right.
Could
Don't be shy.
Okay, all right. Sorry if I sound a bit fumbled, but I did actually put some effort into this. We talk in the, I like the dashboard set up too. That's really, really good, very easy to understand and follow. My question is, we talk about increasing an economic growth mindset across all committees. What does it, have you got an example of what that might sound like? Or
I mean, obviously, council is contributing to the four well-beings. We just want to make sure that the other committees and reports and discussions don't forget about the economic impact of any decisions they make. Yep.
Okay, good, thank you. And then my second question is under Economic Development Program, we talk about events that showcase Hamilton to business leaders and talent. What would a typical event look like?
Mike, do you want to?
Am I good? Wide-ranging, I think we're planning one coming up that you're aware of in terms of, we've done one in the past, leveraging the Chiefs Clark Lounge that we have. But more generally, I think moving forward from a business attraction perspective, leveraging things like what we've done with the Tech and the Tron launch. So it's really events originally envisioned as us putting on gatherings. I think that's been quite severely limited with the budget cuts in terms of looking at bang for buck. What we're looking at for this year is how do we partner and leverage other people who wish to do that, let them effectively carry the cost, and we do the legwork in the background in terms of engaging with businesses for the talent they need, identifying groups of talent, and just sort of being the matchmaker in that respect.
And each of those, I'd assume, would be followed with some form of a call to action? Yep.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, all right. Thanks, that's all I had, Chair. Thank you. Sorry for
If I may, Mr Chair, Sean here, if I could just add to that answer, Hamilton Waikato Tourism, as they mentioned earlier on, frequently host people with influence in terms of the visitor industry so they can see and experience our various products and what the city has to offer. And the H3 team as well, they also bring in a number of people from various businesses that aren't just necessarily tourism or event businesses, but business that want to see Hamilton as a place to come and conduct their meetings and so forth. So there is quite a bit of exposure activity in different layers that are taking place on a frequent basis.
Great, thanks.
Colleagues, any other questions? Councillor Flynn, did you have an earlier question on the address? No. All right, thank you.
I probably did, but I've forgotten it.
Right, colleagues, on on page 122, the motion is that the Economic Development Committee receives the report. I'll move. Councillor Mark, you're happy to second? I'll open it up for debate. I have no debate other than I'm very appreciative of all the hard work that goes on behind the scenes, and I know we've got talented people helping us, and it's appreciated. So that was my spiel. No other speakers? All right. Oh, sorry. Emma, please, go ahead.
I was just going to put a plug in because I didn't get to speak when I was online earlier, just to echo the achievements of the staff, especially in getting the hotel underway and the potential in Rotakoti as well. And thank Chair Ewan for his work and getting these sorts of negotiations across the line. I know they're ongoing, but I just want to take pause and echo thanks that I know others have earlier today for your work.
Excellent. Councillor Tim.
Yeah, I had a bit of a blank when you asked me, but actually the question, and I'm sorry, this is probably not debate, but I'm now in the debate section. It was just a minor question that I had raised prior to this meeting about what we thought the impact of performance options, particularly concerts and that sort of thing, that are currently being hosted at Claudelands, moving to the new regional theatre, would be on the overall, I don't want to use the word viability, but the economic performance of Claudelands. I realise that it's only a minor part of the business, but it is something that we need to be thinking about, because clearly within a couple of years, many of the performances currently at Claudelands are likely to move to the regional theatre, and therefore sort of moving from our control to elsewhere. And I'm sorry, I've raised it in the wrong section, but it is clearly a question for Sean if he's happy to answer it. So I apologise for that.
We have gone to the debate, so that usually constrains us.
I can see that Sean is itching to reply, but...
Exactly, and I'm wanting now, is there anything in our standing orders that enables me as chair to give the discretion? I thought there was. Usually best practice is that's why we ask, is there any further questions?
Yeah, and I apologise. I'm at fault here, so I'm happy for it not to go further.
No problem at all. I think the question is really helpful, and I think it would be good to ask. Sean's keen to answer it, so I'm going to take the unusual step of using my discretion to say, we'll stop the debate. Sean, are you comfortable? Have you understood the question, and are you now happy to answer the question?
Yes, I am, thank you.
Thank you.
Look, essentially we have always been well aware since day one of the new theatre development that a lot of the activity that goes on at Claudelands now, or a number of the activities that go on at Claudelands now, will move to the new theatre. So it's always been on our horizon and our understanding and what the implications are for budget. What I would say is that much of the business that we have that will go to the new theatre is not necessarily big revenue generating business, and some of it because we have taken a decision to provide special accommodations because of the needs of a smaller event can actually be costly for setup. So the actual impact won't be that great. What I think is also important to bear in mind is that in the intervening period, a number of the events that we have had at Claudelands have actually grown in size. They moved from Founders to Claudelands, needs must, but in that time they've actually grown in size, so they will be quite a bit bigger than what the new theatre can actually accommodate. So there's a real mixed bag in terms of response there. But I would say that once the new theatre is built, Hamilton will actually begin to see a lot more activity than we currently do. We have a lot of performance activity that does not come to Hamilton because we don't have the right size and the right capability that they're looking for. And so I think the thing from a Hamilton point of view is we are going to see more content coming our way than we currently enjoy as a result. So yes, Claudelands will lose a little bit, but it won't be significant or have a serious impact on our business, given that it's quite a diverse business, including exhibitions, conferences, various functions and meetings. So the performance arts in the arena is just one very small part of it.
Councillor Tim, do you have a subsequent question?
No, I don't have a subsequent question. I thank you for that response, and I would simply echo the comment that the theatre will enable us to attract a range of different performance opportunities that we have not been able to attract for many, many years, particularly because of the inadequacy of the orchestra pit at Founders, and that is obviously something that Claudelands can't offer either. So I appreciate we're not entirely comparing apples with apples, but I was just interested in the economic impact, and I appreciate your response. And thank you for indulging me. I apologise for the way I went about that.
That's the first time in my 20 years I've heard a wonderful question and debate moved into one. All right, any other speakers? If not, the motion is moved that we receive the General Manager's report. It's been seconded by Councillor Mark. All those in favour say aye. Those against?
The motion is carried unanimously.
Lehigh, lovely to see you. I love your waistcoats. Thank you. You carry them off very well. We're in your hands.
Very much appreciated. I don't know where to go from there.
It's just an observation.
Kei te kai kaunihira, tēnā koe. So yes, the bid policy has been reviewed again in light of the Hamilton East bid expansion poll that was conducted late last year, as elected members will remember. Happy to take the report as read and answer any questions.
Thank you, Lehigh. Colleagues, questions?
Just for clarification, we're going about this. It's really us catching up with technology, isn't it, to capture the real people, if you like, who are going to make these decisions.
Absolutely, yeah. We found that the mail-in ballot process was a bit too difficult for business owners and operators to kind of do, get time away from their business throughout the operating day to vote. So, yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Thanks, Lehigh.
Colleagues, do I have someone who's happy to move? Moved by Councillor Donovan, seconded by Councillor Sarah. No further questions? No? I'll open it up to debate. The mover, Councillor Mark.
We'll cover my debate. It's more about a technology and actually getting to the right people who are going to make the decisions that actually have an impact on, decisions we make further down the stream. So that's all I've got to say. Ooh,
excellent.
18 seconds. Wow.
Councillor Emma.
Similar to the sentiments of Councillor Donovan, is by enabling online polling, we're enabling a better sample and ensuring that we're not skewing data by only taking mailing and just utilising the technology we have. So thank you for whoever decided to make that move, because I think that's really crucial.
Thank you, Councillor Emma. Right, it's been moved and seconded. We'll put it. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Those against?
The motion is carried unanimously.
Excellent. We're bowling along. Item 10, Strategic General Update. Mike Bennett. Mike, welcome to the chair. Welcome back.
Thank you. Good morning or afternoon. I will take the report as read and just comment on the economic development portion, and then I'm sure there may be questions and others may want to comment on the balance of the report. The first part really just highlights or kind of puts a stake in the ground looking backwards a year on our employee engagement program. So just to refresh, the year before, we identified this as a real strategic need for us to push forward and drive meaningful engagement with the employers we have here in Hamilton in order to achieve our goal of effectively growing business investment and grow employers in the city. RF Khan was added into that role about a year ago, a little bit less than a year ago, and really just took off running and just reckless abandon, went out. We set a pretty hard goal of 75 meaningful engagements. That's not a survey, that's not a cup of coffee, but really understanding core businesses in and around our 3 core sectors. He smashed that goal out of the water, and really what came back from it, and Councillor Sarah and I were talking about this, is what we wanted to avoid is just saying we had 75 or 80 cups of coffee, but how much meaningful engagement can we have? The report that was delivered at the November meeting summarized a lot of that. We have created a more in-depth version that deals in some commercially sensitive points that is part of the PX report. So it gets into core things to some businesses that they shared with us in terms of business actions that they identify and ways that we can support them. So that'll be part of the later report in PX. But just to summarize, I think for me and in my experience with economic development, that relationship with employers is the absolute core of economic development. It enables you to do all the things you may want to do beyond that, but if you don't have that meaningful trust-based engagement with employers, it's really difficult to do, and that's why we engaged in that. Second point I'll make on investment promotion, really proud of the Tech and the Tron project that we've put a considerable amount of our effort into, and really a point of pride for us. About a month into a social media push, some of the stats aren't, it's tough to tell in a month. I think we'll be better positioned in May to give a more robust take on the engagement with the actual website. But just as far as LinkedIn goes, which is one avenue, there's been a 30% growth in followers just in a month. Each post, I think there's been about 7, give or take, but they're averaging about 600 impressions per post. So again, it's a start to how we want to shape and message and put our hand up and say Hamilton is a place for this particular sector. I would really encourage you to have a look. In the report, there are 2 links to videos. We didn't want to play them here and take up too much time, but I would really encourage you to take a look at just the production quality. One is about a woman who works at Shift 72, and another is a woman who's at Tuatahi First Fiber. There has since been another one about IT partners, and just even the way that it's framing Hamilton as a place where your career can take off in tech. Again, I feel really passionately about the work that's going there and all that's moving forward. I'll end there and happy to take questions at the right time.
Thank you. Just, I've got a question from Councillor Sarah, but before we go to Councillor Sarah, are you just summarising to attachment 1 or 1 and 2? Okay.
Correct.
So colleagues, we're focusing initially on attachment 1 and 2.
And I'll just note through the chair, there's also a separate update on some of these matters in greater detail on the PX.
PX. Attachment 1 and 2 is the work that I didn't touch on that SODA Inc. does in terms of the regional growth program and that work. We find it really helpful. They're in a space that we're not necessarily well positioned to do around startups and guiding them to government assistance. We just felt that snapshot's really important, part of the wider work, not that we do directly, but rather that they do quite impressively.
Right, okay, excellent. Councillor Sarah? Okay, no problem. Yeah, I mean, it's always, this item's always a little clumsy, I hate to use that word, because there are so many talented people with a whole lot of good things to say. And in some ways, it would be great if we could have each of the speakers do their presentation.
I was about to suggest that maybe we just invite.
Yeah.
Just hold the question.
Hold the question so that we, because there are some really good meaty stuff here. So don't disappear, but could we add to the group?
So I might just invite, if Karen wants to say anything on the growth programs. No, okay, so that's the growth program section. Then Ben Slatteris, the tourism events and visitation. Ben's here. Whether Ben would like to say anything on that section of the report? Okay, and then finally, Tiki might want to come forward and just quickly give a brief commentary on...
So could we have both Tiki and Ben? And Ben, could please come down together. Ben, could you just highlight 3 salient points of your report? The reason I hate to put you on the spot, but one, I would hate for you to come and not have something to do. And two, often when you cover the salient points, it then triggers colleagues to start to ask questions. And that's where we get some meaningful output.
Of course.
So, salient points on your report.
Thanks, Chair. And hello, members. I'm Ben, Director of Operations for H3, for those I haven't met. I trust you've had the opportunity to review our activity report for the 6 months ending December 31st, which is H3 report on page 174. You'll see in that period it was a flurry of activities across all our venues, with the stadium experiencing probably a bit of a record-breaking season with FIFA, Double League, Black Ferns matches, as well as FMX, which is the motorbike tour we had through. But at the same time, during that period, Claudelands also was bustling with events with darts and comedian Bill Bailey, as well as Silver Fern. So it was a very busy period for H3 during that time, and that's reflected in the results there. So yeah, we've taken the end of the year, and now we're working on that momentum to continue that and to continue to grow the events calendar right into 25 onwards. So yeah, very successful 6 months for us, and things are looking good moving forward.
Thank you so much for that. Tiki.
Kia ora koutou.
Your information.
Just embarrassing me now. So when this report was written, we've had some new data since then. So rather than go through what's already in the report, I just wanted to tell you about some of the new data that's come in. So GDP, which is kind of the figure we use to talk about the economy, it has slowed a lot since the September quarter. So we're down to a 0.6% increase. Still positive, but we're really seeing the economy slow down. On the plus side, Hamilton is still experiencing job growth. So we've got the slowdown in GDP, but our job numbers are still growing. The number of people who are living in Hamilton and have jobs, all of those things are growing, and they're still growing at quite a good rate. So we've got 2.8% in filled jobs and 3.7% in Hamiltonians employed. So they're both really good indicators. The caveat is that it tends to take about 12 to 18 months from a slowdown to when we start to see the impact on jobs. So there is a possibility in the future we will see job growth tail off completely and the potential of job losses. But Hamilton's economy is going a lot stronger. We've got a lot of industrial growth in particular, and all of these things are bringing jobs to our city in a way that other regions and cities aren't experiencing. The other thing we've had come in recently from Harcourts is just around office space vacancy. Hamilton has very little high-grade office space available. It's like really tiny. Where we've got the big vacancies is in that E grade, which is not, it's the lower class. So people are looking for, good office space that has the facilities they want. We're seeing a drift away from the more flexible working environment, and you're seeing people come back and businesses wanting to have their people in the office for all of those sort of, I guess, in many ways, productivity, and those soft things like having a chat at the water cooler. So we are seeing a big drive within the city. Retail, on the other hand, is pretty soft, and retail stats out today show that retail across the country is in the negatives already. And just one other thing, we have talked a lot about residential consenting in the past, and I believe this is moving to strategic growth in the future. But obviously there's a bit within the report that looks at our consenting trends. We are still seeing a slowdown, and we've got a really heavy reliance at the moment on the work that Kāinga Ora is doing directly, but also the indirect stuff where they're supporting our construction sector through this period of downturn. I'll take any questions.
Now, colleagues, we have an opportunity to ask a range of questions of three very capable individuals. I have Councillor Pike.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, staff, for all your detailed reporting. I was just looking at, I've gone way past it, I think it was page 163, on Mike's report, 165, sorry, on data analytics, economics and policy. Is there any way we can look at unfilled roles in relation to filled or the total capacity? I think getting this data, especially around, say, healthcare for the proposed medical school, would give great insight as to the gap that's there in understanding the actual need, and not just the amount of positions filled, and would in other sectors as well, it would help with strategic decisions, I think.
Oh, I wish.
Oh.
So we do get SEEK job data, but it's at a regional level. We don't get Hamilton-specific data, and nobody collates that information. So we can monitor things and just have a look at kind of numbers, but nobody's actually collating that data in a useful or a holistic way. There's like pieces of information that we can use, but yeah, it's not great.
Is even from like our major employers such as the hospital, we couldn't get that kind of.
I mean, we could ask individuals, but it'd be really important not to make assumptions about the whole employment sector from that. But we could definitely ask for individual cases and provide case stuff. But as a whole level, we really need someone to collect that data.
Yeah, I guess it'd be good to get even some indications that yes, there's a lot of unfilled positions in this field or not, because I think that actually tells more of a story than just the resulting number. Yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Chair. My first question is actually to Mike. Is he? Oh, there you are. Okay. Mike, in terms of engagement with employers, can we have, is a next step potentially having some concrete recommendations that come from that feedback where there are strong themes and where it comes within the scope of council business?
Absolutely, yep. So the reporting that we've done in the previous committees does summarize, I guess you'd call it insights that come from those meetings at a sector level. So for example, sometimes they're commercially sensitive. We try and aggregate them up for the public report so that not an individual company can be identified, but more a theme across the sector. So for example, in the past, the logistics sector, in talking to people out at Ruakura in the Super Hub, a few of those businesses reported really, going back last year, really robust interest, quality talent. They'd put out X number of job applications and have 2X, 3X, 4X really qualified candidates in that space. That told us, and we shared it back with other businesses, that the labor force supply in those particular skills was really, really strong. So again, it wasn't something that we could offer as a product, but more as an insight to other businesses based on our position as sort of being in the middle of all of them. I think in the PX report, you'll find where we have met with companies that had really specific concerns, issues, questions where we've actioned how we solve them. But again, some of them were commercially sensitive, and so we've put them in the PX report. I think more broadly speaking, back to my point about, the engagement part is just sort of the starting point, what we do with it and how we develop it. I think in my experience with being on the corporate side, when you go to a community and you see a really engaged corporate area, whether it's, CE, head of HR, or staff levels, that tells businesses interested in investing here that this is a really good place to do that, with all the other things needing to be there, infrastructure and housing and all those core things. But the part that we can influence in making sure everybody feels connected, engaged, that they know we're here to help them to the extent we can, is really half the battle in that investment attraction game.
Thank you.
And again, I on point, you'll find in PX some real clear examples of the great work that's going on behind the scenes that we can't share in the public realm, but it's happening. Councillor Andrew.
Sorry, no, I have
Oh, sorry.
3 more questions.
I would hate to stymie.
One of them can hopefully be quite quick. It's the Eastern Transport Corridor was mentioned here in terms of the need to open up industrial land. When did we get a more detailed update on that? Because I usually have quite a good memory, but I don't recall seeing the options analysis. So could we just understand when we can view that? The Eastern Transport Corridor, when do we get to actually have a closer view of the work happening?
I'll need to come back to that, Councillor Sarah, at possibly the next committee meeting for Strategic Growth District Plan.
Okay, thank you.
That referenced in this
It was
agenda?
referenced in strategic growth, but I went back to it. It's only a couple of paragraphs.
Right.
And I had thought there would be more actual detail coming to us at some point.
Wouldn't that come to your committee?
Yes, it
Could well
does.
do, but I'm just wanting to ensure it's...
It's certainly absolutely on the strategic issues radar for your committee. I'll just make a note to see when we're going to get a next formal comprehensive update.
Thank you. And so another question is around elected member requested information, and I'm wondering if this came from my own email to the General Manager. This was around population structure, so not just population growth. I guess there was some interesting commentary on there around where we see the impacts of ageing population, potential decline in immigration in the future going. Is that something we could have further discussion on in the context of infrastructure investment and looking at Three Waters and what the future holds for some of our other regional partners and things?
Yes.
Okay, I don't want to hold things up today, but I want just flagging I'd like to understand more on that.
Couple of these things that transcends both committees. And as Chair of Strategic, I'm sure you're all on top of it. I think some of what we've been having here is being moved over to your committee. So I'm sure you won't lose focus of that when it comes to your committee.
Yeah, and the other question is really, again, more on what's shifting to strategic growth, so I'll wait on that question, hold it there.
If you're like me, I just wait to be told by Blair and it just happens. Any other questions? Yes, Councillor Andrew.
Thank you, Chair Ewan. Tiki, my interest is in the residential consenting. So start off with Kaingora houses. Do we have a fair idea where the majority of those houses are going in the city?
They are all in infill.
Yeah.
But they are in pockets around the city, so reasonably well spread. We can provide a slightly better breakdown, but there is a lot in kind of existing areas where there's a lot of redevelopment. What I would say is within that number, that's what's coming from Kaingaora from Consentium.
Yeah.
There is also a big tranche that we know is happening, but we can't understand fully in exact numbers around KO procuring homes from private developers.
Yes.
So there's a portion there that's not covered by that amount, but all of the stuff they're doing is primarily in infill and redeveloping existing sites.
Yeah.
But they have acquired a few additional sites as well.
Yeah. Next question. There's a rather scary number that consents that have been issued, but the building work not started, has shot up by 40. Yeah.
Mindful. Look, I get it because everything exciting happens at the Economic Development Committee. but I'm concerned for my good colleague Sarah, who has less on her agenda. A lot of this stuff actually falls into her scope.
Right.
So answer this last question, but I've got to drag that.
Yeah.
Blair keeps giving me the look like it's out of scope, it's out of scope.
Right.
because it's really in Sarah's wheelhouse, although I get why you want to ask it here, because it happens here, really.
Yeah. Okay. So, yeah, the 43% of consents not actually being started, can we find out why?
We've talked to a few developers, and there's a few reasons. And one other thing I'd point out, if you look at infill and greenfield are very different models for developing and selling. And so greenfield hasn't really changed. It's the infill component where you've got a more common model that a developer will develop the sites and then sell on the market. So it's kind of not surprising when there's a really strong, like there's a slowdown in house prices, it's a lot harder to make those numbers stack up. The other thing, talking to developers, in May and November last year, there was an increase in insulation requirements by government. And a few of them mentioned that they had lodged consents that they may or may not action. They'd put them in so that they could beat the increased requirements. There were estimates of $5,000 to $10,000 a house for the additional requirements, and they were waiting to see when the market turned, or when they thought the market would turn, before they would start those projects.
Right. Thank you.
Kesh, you've disappeared.
I just wasn't sure if it was.
Give it a try. It will all depend if Blair gives me
And
that
it was
long.
more just to get, because Tiki and the team's insight.
They are so valuable.
Yeah, especially because it's like really easy to understand. I was looking at the industrial land supply in the report, and there was a note about the airport adding to that supply in the future, and just reflecting on this morning's discussion, just thoughts around the timing, with Hamilton having 2 and a bit years supply and the airport coming online, and just the big picture, really.
I think Blair's looking at Mark behind me for that one. I mean, there is, and I think really important thing, and I know Mike drills it quite a lot, is thinking about Hamilton as more than our city boundaries, because the reality is there is a limited land supply. The airport, around those cusp areas that we can, is still Hamilton. The workers are going to come from Hamilton. The goods and services are going to move through Hamilton. So that regional metro spatial look is super important to making sure that our land supply improves. It takes a long time, is my understanding, to get a plan change through. And I know the team are working in that space around what they do. And it is important if Hamilton will continue to grow, it will continue to demand industrial land, whether that's in the city or the airport or wherever, doesn't really matter.
I think just, Councillor, one of the things I talk with my team a lot about is that boundaryless view to Hamilton. Horatū, Hautapu Airport, they are not part of our district, but for all intents and purposes, they are part of the greater Hamilton economic engine. And this committee is about economic engine. And, everyone who works in those areas, a lot of them live in Hamilton, or they don't live in Hamilton. A lot of their business activity is done with other businesses in Hamilton, or they get services here. So it's a great question. Mark's thinking about it from a planning perspective and land use planning and infrastructure considerations and, who jurisdicts that. But from Tiki's perspective and Mike's perspective, we're thinking about jobs and productivity and growth. And so that, in that sense, it's a fuzzy line that only really we care about as councils. But, you drive those areas, they're Hamilton, And that's, when I come in, for example, through Horatū and I see an enormous big warehouse being built in the Waikato District Council Horatū land, I go, that's great. It's because it's actually going to be helping the Hamilton economy. Yes, it's rates paid to Waikato District Council, but it's part of our engine, it's part of our story.
Any other question of these wonderful 3 people? Ben, Tiki and Mike? No? Right, so draw your attention to page 161. The motion I'll move, which is that the Economic Development Committee receives the report, seconded by Tim. I'll quickly say in my debate, I love this part of the agenda, because it's really, we're in a unique position that we get access to these really smart people with some really easy to follow. What I like about it is even I sit there and I can understand it. They seem to be able to, I don't want to use the word dumb it down, but they can explain it in a way that we can absorb and that it reflects how it affects all of the parts that council does. And so I'm always very happy to share that information, and that's why we produce a lot of this report to every small business in Hamilton. You know, they should leverage that, and we're very happy to share it with our friends in Strategic. I also like to think that when looking at across jurisdictions, my term now is Metro Hamilton. So I see the likes of, you know, the Waipa, the Waikato, all of that fringe activity. It's all just Metro Hamilton. And we can celebrate that and leverage that. So again, thank you. Seconder, Councillor Tim, do you have anything? No?
To the council, I'm certainly appreciating exactly the point that you've just made. I like the clarity with which the information is provided. I'm grateful for the answers that have been provided. As I become more familiar with the way this committee and other council committees work, I'm sure that I'll have more questions, but at this stage I endorse your comments.
Thanks, thanks, Chair Ewan, and reiterate Councillor Tim's comments as well. That's this is the committee that really does spin my wheels as well. Look, we know that when unemployment is low, that workers will usually be paid more and spend more, which we know is good for our economy. There are a couple of red flags on the horizon, but there is also some positives to start coming through, which will see the benefit of having put growth in play previously. Look, anecdotally, businesses have said to us that they haven't, in the past, they hadn't heard from HCC, and this is where my, I give praise to Mike and his team. They hadn't heard from HCC, and now they have, and it feels like there's a real empowerment or an enabling of business starting to really start to kick off. So, look, I'm fielding questions from people out of zone all the time saying, why should we move to Hamilton? And it's simple. We've got good stuff going on down here. So, come on in, the water's fine, as they say.
The good news for Hamilton on the consenting front is that Kaingora has a remarkable ability to build cheap houses in an incredibly expensive way. They average $4,500 per square metre, whereas the rest of the market builds expensive houses for $3,500 a square metre. So that's the one good thing that I'm seeing in the housing market at the moment. That's it.
The day.
The motion is carried unanimously.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm happy to take this report as read and answer any questions.
Oh, I love how understated you are. You do some great work, and colleagues. Again, we've got some really good stuff in PX as well. Any questions of Nicholas? If not, I'll move that we receive the report, seconded by... Any debate, colleagues? My quick debate is, again, in a formal environment. Nicholas, I want to thank you for your work with the hotel, with Templeton. The city owes you a huge debt, and I really appreciate it, and all the things that happen that we don't see, and the hours you put in, and how long you've been doing it. I thank you. Right, I'll put. Oh, sorry, Councillor Tim. No.
Mr. Oh, sorry. It's a procedural point, but I just want to echo the point that you have just made, and given how incredibly significant that this particular achievement is for our city, I'm just wondering if the minutes can record a motion of congratulations or something, or perhaps that already happens, but I think it would be appropriate for it to do so, because this is one of the most significant developments for our city in a very long time, and it's also something that I think the ratepayers are beginning to see as commercially very exciting for us.
Governance, would you be happy if we just add a B to receive the report and the council, the committee formally congratulates Nicholas Wells and team for all the work they've done achieving the hotel announcement, something to that effect? Are you happy, Mark, with that as the seconder? Thank you. So, Councillor Serra.
Thank you as well for all of the work on this.
Wonderful. Councillor Andrew.
Nicholas, when the chair said the city owes you a huge debt, we do actually have a huge debt that we would like to give you.
That's what it is. You beat me to it.
Quotes. All right. I'll move the motion. All those in favour say aye. Those against?
The motion is carried unanimously.
Excellent. So we are now on public excluded. I'll move that we move into public excluded, seconded by Councillor Mark. All those in favour say aye. Those against? Right. 5 minutes, colleagues, and we'll